Chapter 299. Chapter 3. His Royal Highness's talk about fame and fortune is quite insightful. If a scholar fishes for fame and compliments, it may seem easy, but in fact, it's no different from a merchant. A famous scholar's mysterious talk harms the country. This scholar is not a scholar. Holding the scriptures at home, laughing at the frozen bones outside the door. This kind of reading is indeed not reading. It's just reading the impolite, heartless, and unrighteous heavenly book. Mount Hui Shenyuan Jingqing, on behalf of Zhang Xuanping, who is both a teacher and a friend, pays his respects to His Royal Highness. Shenyuan Jingqing, on behalf of Wang Yangming, a scholar from Xianxia, pays his respects to the King of Bailiang. Finally, Shenyuan Jingqing pays his respects to the King of Bailiang on behalf of all the poor scholars in the world. Su Fengnian widened his eyes and looked at the scholar in green who was walking towards him. He didn't know that this guy was eavesdropping just now, and he couldn't detect the flow of his qi at all. When they were 30 steps away, the man who called himself Shenyuan Jingqing bowed 3 times in a row. After straightening his back, he stopped moving forward. Murong Wuzhu, who was squatting beside His Royal Highness and picking hawthorns, dropped her hawthorns on the ground when she heard the 2 words, Shenyuan. Murong Tonghuang was a little calm, but his knuckles were blue, revealing the panic in his heart. For the siblings, the Shenyuan clansmen on the Bull Mound were not the Zhonghu individual immortals who enjoyed the good fortune of the land alone, but the devil who played Jianzhou in the palm of his hand. However, Murong Tonghuang still fiercely pulled away his sister who was trying to grab Su Fengnian's sleeve. He almost helped her stand up and walked away. It seemed that he didn't want to be implicated, but Su Fengnian and Murong Tonghuang's lips almost curled up at the same time after they separated. Obviously, they had a tacit understanding. Since someone from the Shenyuan family had taken the initiative to attack instead of defending, even knowing Su Fengnian's identity, Su Fengnian didn't dare to slack off in the slightest, even if it was the infamous Shenyuan Jingqing. This person had respectfully bowed 3 times, so there must be something fishy going on. After Su Fengnian stood up, he caught a glimpse of Huang Man'er and Qing Yao approaching. They were both in a horn-like position. He smiled and asked, "Mr.'s 3 bows are enough to shock the heavens and make ghosts weep. I just don't know if Mr. dares to do such a thing on the Bull Mound?" Shenyuan Jingqing said calmly, "If you say I don't dare, His Royal Highness doesn't seem to believe it. If I say I don't dare, His Royal Highness will draw his knife on the spot." Su Fengnian stared at the eldest grandson of the Shenyuan family, who had become the laughingstock of the Shenyuan family. He didn't want to be deliberately mystified anymore, so he said impatiently, "Say it, why are you looking for me? If it weren't for your friendship with Mr. Sun, why would I talk nonsense with you?" Shenyuan Jingqing went straight to the point and said calmly, "Your Highness, do you know why my daughter, Shenyuan Qingfeng, made things difficult for you in Wuzhou?" Su Fengnian clenched the spring thunder in his left hand. He wanted to kill with 1 blow with the knife in his left hand. "You didn't go to Mount Hui to look for trouble with the Shenyuan family, but dared to come down the mountain to provoke me? When did the Shenyuan family have a scholar who worried about the country and the people?" Su Fengnian exhaled softly, the qi in his body surging like a river. He smiled and said, "Sir, please speak." Shenyuan Jingqing said calmly, "You look very much like someone. You look like 4 or 5 years old, but your spirit is very similar." Su Fengnian's spring thunder exploded and arrived in front of Shenyuan Jingqing in an instant. It was born out of Spear Fairy Wang Xiu's famous skill, Overlord Armor Removal. The spring thunder struck down, entering Shenyuan Jingqing's neck and coming out from his waist. With 1 successful strike, it was about to cut him in half. Shenyuan Jingqing frowned. His left foot didn't move, but the tip of his right foot spun, drawing a semicircle on the ground. His left hand held the book behind his back, and his right hand reached out with 2 pale fingers to pinch the spring thunder, following the momentum of Su Fengnian's knife to remove the force. The middle-aged scholar made a sound of surprise and was slightly surprised. The scholar's cuff holding the knife fluttered even though there was no wind. Su Fengnian turned the blade, and Shenyuan Jingqing let go of his hand and stepped back. The tips of his feet crisscrossed, and his figure was indescribably light and graceful. He continued, "And this person is the man that Qingfeng's mother couldn't let go of. If this man didn't die of illness, she definitely wouldn't have married into Mount Hui. Qingfeng's calligraphy and painting were all learned from her mother. There is a portrait that has been hanging for 20 years. When Qingfeng saw you in the lantern market, it was inevitable that she would lose her composure. I hope your highness will be magnanimous enough to forgive her. Su Fengnian took large strides forward, and the spring thunder pierced straight at the whale. Shenyuan Jingqing held the book in his left hand and struck the spring thunder, swatting it away. Su Fengnian's right hand was about to unsheathe the embroidered winter sword when Shenyuan Jingqing, who had endured it time and time again, snorted coldly. His figure suddenly moved forward, and he pressed one hand on Su Fengnian's shoulder. With a gentle push, Su Fengnian was forced to turn his body, but he still took the opportunity to pull out the embroidered winter sword. It was the posture of pulling up a mountain. Shenyuan Jingqing sneered. You don't know when to stop. How rude and unreasonable His Royal Highness is. Su Fengnian inexplicably sheathed his sword, and the spring thunder and embroidered winter sword returned to their sheaths. It was because of Huang Man. He smiled and said, last time when I went to the tomb outside Zhejiang City, I saw a few wine cups. Were they all yours, sir? Shenyuan Jingqing nodded dejectedly and asked, why did you sheathe your sword at the last moment? Su Fengnian pointed at Huang Man who was squatting in the distance and smiled. My little brother knows if others have any ill intentions. Shenyuan Jingqing said with mixed feelings, he was born in the Vajra realm. Su Fengnian was puzzled. Pardon me for asking, but you are obviously a martial arts expert. How did you end up in such a state at Bulgang? Shenyuan Jingqing calmly revealed the earth-shattering truth. Qingfeng's mother and Shenyuan Great Pan were dual cultivating to take revenge on me. Now this old ancestor wants Qingfeng to enter Bulgang again. Shenyuan Jingqing's voice was steady. He did not deliberately lower his voice to cover his ugliness. Murong Tonghuang and Murong Wuzhu looked at each other. Even the thick-skinned Su Fengnian was stunned. He was shocked beyond words. How could there be such a shameless old man who liked to take advantage of the grass around his nest? That was the daughter-in-law of his eldest grandson. In the end, he did not even let go of his great-granddaughter? He would rather kill the wrong person than let go of the wrong person? Compared to this sensational inside story, trying to kidnap the Murong Shuangbi was not worth mentioning. Shenyuan Jingqing said bitterly, this old ancestor did not indulge in beauty. It was because he wanted to achieve the immortal Zhenren realm that he took an unorthodox path. Su Fengnian scolded, Bull*****. Whether it is the Dao sex bedroom technique or the esoteric sex dual cultivation, Shenyuan Jingqing, are you still a man? Shenyuan Jingqing said indifferently, I have learned all the secret exercises of Mount Hui's Wending Pavilion in 20 years. I have taken a fork in the road with no return. I am not afraid of death. I only ask for the safety of the mother and daughter. Shenyuan Jingqing said slowly. He coughed a few times and covered his mouth. The bloodstains were scarlet. It was a ghastly sight. Su Fengnian could not keep up with the thoughts of this sickly scholar. He asked, can you fight with Shenyuan Great Plate to the death? I heard that this old monster's strength is very strong. The Taoist classics in Shenyuan Jingqing's hands were already stained red. He put them behind his back. He smiled at Su Fengnian and said, I can. He wants to achieve immortality. I will let him experience it. However, the immortal Zhenren realm that I have achieved is not really immortality. Therefore the outcome is 50-50. However, after I die, what will happen to the mother and daughter? I have been thinking about this problem. That is why I have been waiting for His Royal Highness. Today, I came to see Your Highness. Your first blade was excellent. Not to mention that your bladesmanship is accomplished, your blade is even more ruthless. Shenyuan Jingqing sincerely asks for Your Highness' help. In this world, only Your Highness can save the mother and daughter. Su Fengnian was shocked again. Shenyuan Jingqing continued, once Shenyuan Great Plate dies, only my father Shenyuan Guoqi and my younger brother Shenyuan Jingxian will be troublesome in Mount Hui. If these two die, as long as Your Highness can protect Qingfeng's life, you can use her as a puppet to control the Bulgang. Su Fengnian asked, is this a trap set by the Shenyuan family? Shenyuan Jingqing shook his head and said, no. Su Fengnian was helpless. He shook his head and said, if it is as you said, it is not difficult for me to do it. However, you must help to get rid of either Shenyuan Guoqi or Shenyuan Jingxian. Otherwise, it will be too difficult for a helpless Shenyuan Qingfeng to swallow an elephant. Shenyuan Jingqing said without hesitation, all right. I will go up the mountain and kill Shenyuan Jingxian first. Su Fengnian was speechless. Was this man completely crazy? Shenyuan Jingqing looked at the navy blue bull gang and murmured, I am here. This mountain man went up the mountain to kill people. Chapter 300. This bull hill that confronted the mansion of Taoist master was really a mixed group of good and bad people. Enjoying the good fortune of the land alone? Su Fengnian sat back on the hillside and wrote a few names on the ground with the spring thunder. He asked Murong Tonghuang, how much do you think Shenyuan Jingqing's words can be trusted? Murong Tonghuang sneered, even if Shenyuan Jingqing really endured the humiliation for 20 years, it's hard to guarantee that this lunatic won't attack His Highness. Killing Shenyuan Dandan and Shenyuan Jingxian, this person will definitely die. But Shenyuan, the Grand Master of Swordsmanship, has been guarding Mount Hui for hundreds of years. How can His Highness's 100 cavalrymen easily suppress him? It's better to let 2 tigers fight than to lure the tiger away. I don't believe that Shenyuan Jingqing, as the legitimate son of Shenyuan's sect, didn't have a few unknown schemes in the past 20 years. Once His Highness dies in the Bull Hill, Bailiang will only vent his anger on Mount Hui. The mother and daughter took advantage of the chaos to enter Jianghu. They are really free birds flying in the sky. If Shenyuan Jingqing is really sincere, kowtowing to His Highness 3 times and exposing his own scandal is nothing. Su Fengnian nodded. It's probably true that Shenyuan Jingqing wants to turn against his family. Su Fengnian sighed. 20 years to achieve immortality through unorthodox methods and overturn hundreds of years of foundation with his own strength. Why does it sound so chilling? Murong Tonghuang had a pair of silkworm eyebrows, but he usually looked more charming than heroic. At this time he raised his eyebrows and smiled even more gloatingly. The Shenyuan family should have fallen apart and died long ago. Su Fengnian took the hawthorn from Huang Manor and sat cross-legged. He put the hawthorn in his robe and threw one into his mouth. He waved to Murong Tonghuang and said, Don't be in a hurry to say angry words. The onlooker sees the situation clearly. You're half an outsider. We're not in a hurry to go up the mountain. You can talk about it casually and see if you can find some clues. No matter how inexplicable it is, in the end, there are only 2 paths. Go up the mountain or not. Murong Tonghuang nodded and said, Going up the mountain, Your Highness has to take a lot of risks. I'm afraid this is also the original intention of Shenyuan Jingqing to endure until now. He may not be willing to fall out with his family until he has a chance to rely on a strong external force. Otherwise, with Mount Hui's family background, only a land immortal like Qi Xuanzhen can come and go like walking on flat ground. Shenyuan Jingqing is obviously not so strong. When the snipe and the clam fight, the mother and daughter will reap the benefits. In fact, it's better if Your Highness doesn't go up the mountain. Or rather, you can go up the mountain slowly and let Shenyuan Jingqing fight with all his strength. I believe that by that time, Hui Mountain's vitality will be greatly damaged. However, if you want to fish in troubled waters at this time, it's far better to take the risk and go up the mountain to hold the line for Shenyuan Jingqing. Su Fengnian always couldn't finish the hawthorn because he almost finished one. Huang Man had already carefully wiped a handful with his sleeve. Su Fengnian wiped the carelessly written words on the ground with spring lightning and threw some hawthorns to the siblings. He said with a smile, Go up the mountain, we have to go up the mountain early. Murong Tonghuang frowned and said, Why? Su Fengnian stood up and looked at Bulgang and said softly, To watch a fight. Murong Tonghuang asked carefully and tentatively, Your Highness is addicted to martial arts? Su Fengnian said self-mockingly, I'm just greedy for life and afraid of death. Of course, there are also the thoughts of chivalrous heroes who want to save beauty since childhood. Murong Tonghuang turned his head and couldn't help laughing. The words chivalrous heroes could be said by anyone, but it was said by the eldest son of Ren too, who made the whole Jianghu tremble under the sound of horse hooves. It was ridiculous. Su Fengnian said with a smile, Laugh if you want. Although Murong Tonghuang had let down some of his guard, he didn't have the guts to be presumptuous in front of His Royal Highness. Of course, he didn't dare to make fun of him. Su Fengnian patted Huang Manor's head and said, Let's go to Mount Hui. Tear apart whoever blocks the way. Huang Manor's originally turbid eyes instantly blossomed with light. Su Fengnian turned to Blue Bird and said, Go to Xiaoyao Temple and tell the old god of swords and the Phoenix Battalion. You'd better bring the instant spear. We'll meet at Qinglong Creek. This time, we'll play big. By the way, I'll remind the old celestial master Zhao Shituan that Mount Longhu better not get involved. You can explain to the old celestial master that Shenyuan Jingqing invited us to go up the mountain. Let him know that this is a family matter of Mount Hui, and not me trying to make trouble for the Shenyuan family. Bluebird held the bamboo basket and nodded. Got it. On top of the mud wall of Xiaoyao Temple, old Taoist Zhao stretched his neck and looked at the middle-aged Confucian scholar who was walking on the river. Li Chungang sneered. This old man really doesn't understand the ways of the world. Back then, heavenly phenomenon aside, a Finger Xian realm cultivator could rank among the top 10 in the world. Now, Finger Xian realm cultivators are as worthless as roadside cabbages. Are they embarrassed to greet people if they're not in the Vajra realm? Zhao Shituan, who had just touched the threshold of the Finger Xian realm, blushed and said, Old brother Li, you must be joking. These 30 years in the Jianghu are indeed different from the previous 30 years. There are many geniuses and freaks, but there aren't as many Vajras as dogs. His Royal Highness going out to travel is naturally different from ordinary people roaming the Jianghu. If Su Fengnian wasn't the son of the king of Bailiang and his Royal Highness could be hereditary, how could he have met Wu Lu Ding who blocked the river? How could he have met the 11th Wang Mingyin? Even more so, he wouldn't have been humiliated by Shenyuan Jingqing who had just arrived at Mount Longhu. It's not that the Jianghu is changing too quickly, but that old brother Li is following this brat who's too eye-catching. How could a Jianghu person without any ability dare to humiliate himself in front of the heir of Bailiang? Let's not talk about old brother Li. These 100 elite Phoenix battalion are enough to make a big pot of water. Small fishes and shrimps would have been slapped to death long ago. Li Chungang snorted and said, What's up with this Shenyuan Jingqing who floated down the bull mound? What's up with your so-called immortal Zhenren realm? The old celestial master stroked his beard and squinted his eyes. This young man has a tough life. He's very talented, but as the eldest grandson of the Shenyuan family, he chose not to walk the path of martial arts. When he went down the mountain to take the imperial examinations, he fell in love with a Jianghu woman who didn't know how to repay kindness. That woman didn't come from a good background, but she was stubborn. She probably didn't want to be brought up to Mount Huishan. Shenyuan Pan saw the opportunity and used both the carrot and the stick to dual cultivation. As for whether Shenyuan Pan had the intention to force his grandson to practice martial arts, only God knows. In the past 20 to 30 years, Shenyuan Pan had devoted himself to cultivating the joyful Zen and the art of sex. He had no taboos at all. A few yellow crowns from Mount Longhu had been killed by him. However, those Taoist nuns were also strange. After the incident, they did not say a word. Instead, they took the initiative to be cauldrons at Yunyu side. Shenyuan Pan's ability to control people was impressive. Heh, this old bastard was already popular with women when he was young. I heard that in the past 2 years, he took a fancy to Shenyuan Jingqing's daughter, Shenyuan Qingfeng. I guess this time he finally crossed Shenyuan Jingqing's bottom line and no longer swallowed it. However, I'm not sure how Shenyuan Jingqing became an immortal Zhenren. I only know that this kid has been borrowing books from the Celestial Master Residence for the past 20 years. He's always been on good terms with my arrogant nephew, Zhao Danping. How strange. I'll have to ask Zhao Danping later. The old god of swords sneered. Looking at his ocean of qi, it's the reverse path of seeking death. It's not worth mentioning. The old celestial master said regretfully, if this kid wasn't so eager for success, the land of bliss on the stone tablet would be worthy of its name. The old god of swords spat and said, if he didn't seek death and used his life to exchange for the realm, would he just watch his daughter enter the mouth of that old bastard Shenyuan Pan? Zhao Shituan put his hands in his sleeves and sighed continuously. He frowned and said, Brother Li, do you think His Royal Highness will take over this hot potato? Li Chungang said without hesitation, Nonsense, it's at least a battle of Xian Finger against Xian Finger. It might even be the peak battle of celestial phenomenon. Would that kid not go? Zhao Shituan still sighed and said, if that's the case, Jiangdong Shenyuan will really be unable to recover for at least 30 years. Li Chungang sneered and said, Shenyuan and Swordpool are already a few levels lower than the Wu family sword tomb. Back then, the Wu family swordmaster came out and defeated 10,000 riders with 9 swords. That's true glory. Shenyuan and Swordpool are nothing. Can they stand shoulder to shoulder with the Wu family sword tomb? It's all the flattery of those bastards in the Jianghu. Seeing Bluebird carrying a bamboo basket of hawthorns towards Xiaoyao Temple, the old god of swords asked, Are you going to Mount Huishan later? The old celestial master laughed bitterly and said, I'm not feeling well. Li Chungang floated down the wall and said disdainfully, Old woman, you still have such matters? Zhao Shituan stared but didn't dare to refute. Li Chungang added insult to injury and said, Aren't you afraid that your disciple will be at a disadvantage? The old celestial master suddenly became spirited and said happily, My disciple won't be at a disadvantage. It's not that I'm boasting, but the number of people who can hurt Huang Manor can be counted on one hand. But if you want to kill my disciple, there might be one or two in Mount Longhu, but there aren't any in Mount Huishan. Next should be a small climax. Chapter 301. The buildings on the Bull Mound were very particular, with a strict hierarchy and complicated rules. For example, the rear courtyard where the eldest branch lived was small, but it had everything. There was also a banquet hall, vermilion lacquer, carved red sandalwood, and flying beasts. A large plaque hung on the wall with the words, Heavenly Eternal Winter. There was a courtyard in front and a garden in the back. The east and west wings had a building above them, and there was a large glazed vat half the height of a person in the courtyard. It could hold several thousand catties of water, and there were 8 or 9 lotus flowers planted there. They were slender and elegant, their roots visible, and a dozen or so fat red carps leisurely swam inside. It was early autumn, and yellow leaves covered the blue stone tiles under the eaves between the red walls and green tiles. No one cleaned the place, so it was cold and cheerless. A woman in a gorgeous palace dress stood in front of the glazed fish vat, holding a small porcelain bowl. She tossed bait into the vat, attracting red carps to swim happily. Her posture was graceful, and her expression was languid. A tall and sturdy man in gorgeous clothes walked straight into the courtyard. A maidservant beside the woman hurriedly lowered her head, not daring to look at him. The middle-aged man's hands were on the edge of his onyx belt, and he habitually gave off an arrogant feeling. Even though he should be calling the woman's sister-in-law in this courtyard, he still refused to restrain his arrogance. He raised a hand and waved, driving away the maidservant who was staring at her feet. It was unknown how the submissive maidservant saw the man waving his hand, but she ran toward the door as if she had been pardoned. When she passed by the man, she was fiercely slapped on the buttocks, causing her to pale in fright. The woman with a cold expression was indifferent to this and continued to feed the carps. The middle-aged man walked in front of the glazed vat and extended 2 fingers to stroke the smooth walls of the vat. He smiled and said, Sister-in-law, we're a single man and woman, aren't we doing anything? The woman stared at the carefree red carps and coldly said, Shenyuan Jingxian, aren't you afraid that if you swallow my dumplings, you'll burn your tongue along with your heart, liver, spleen and kidneys? The man who was called by his name by the woman said indifferently, Sister-in-law lives in seclusion, so of course you don't know. After the ancestor came out of seclusion this time, he intends to entrust the position of the family head to me. It's no wonder that sister-in-law doesn't know about this. Sister-in-law and the ancestor haven't dual cultivated for some time, right? The man placed his palm on the colored glass fish tank and abruptly exerted his strength. More than a dozen carps and lotus roots were pulled to the side of the tank and stuck to it, unable to move. He bent down to look at the carps that were struggling on their deathbed and smiled. Shenyuan Jingxian has been drooling over sister-in-law for a long time. This is something that everyone in Mount Hui knows. Once I officially take over this large bull's nest, how could the old ancestor care about an old and worn-out cauldron? That bookworm big brother of mine worships you like a fairy, thinking that you're above the common populace, but he clearly doesn't understand a woman's thoughts at all. He's wasted all those sage books he's read. A woman in her 30s is like a wolf and in her 40s is like a tiger. Once she's tasted the sweet rain after a long drought, how could she endure loneliness? Isn't that right, sister-in-law? The woman was humiliated in such a way, but she remained unmoved. She only looked at the carps that were almost suffocating to death and indifferently mocked. Shenyuan Jingxian, what are you so impatient for? It won't be too late to vent your frustrations when you become the head of the Shenyuan family. That's right. Do you remember when you went to southern border 6 years ago? Sister-in-law just happened to see that loyal and unswerving wife of yours on the large bull's bed. But she was extremely seductive. When she first came to Mount Hui, she called me a depraved slut every day. Haven't you wondered why she shut up these past few years? I might as well make it clear to you. It was sister-in-law who pitied her for being lonely. So rather than wasting energy scolding others, she might as well save her energy to serve others in bed. Sister-in-law was so merciful that she earnestly asked old ancestor to shower her with rain and dew. Shenyuan Jingshuan's expression darkened and he paused for a moment. His palm left the wall of the glazed fish tank and the lotus flowers all snapped. Blood seeped out from the scales of the dozen or so carps, and their corpses floated to the surface. Shenyuan Jingxian said the word, good, 3 times in a row, then grinned maliciously. Shenyuan Jingqing, this big brother, can't do anything even after being beaten 3 times with a stick. I didn't expect sister-in-law to be so scheming, knowing how to use small tricks to retaliate. This is for the best. Today, I'll carry sister-in-law back. I want to see if there's anyone in the eldest branch who can be as unyielding as sister-in-law. Or perhaps Shenyuan Jingqing will simply wantonly have fun with sister-in-law here. I heard that sister-in-law fell ill from longing for a portrait, so I don't mind hanging that portrait at the head of your bed to liven things up. Sister-in-law, what do you think? Isn't Jingxian much more amorous than Big Brother? The woman calmly gazed at the blood-soaked fish tank and smiled. Compared to Shenyuan Jingqing, you think too highly of him. Shenyuan Jingxian asked, Sister-in-law, when you're in bed later, you'll have to use all your skills. A woman's 18 types of martial arts. Shenyuan Jingxian, you're worse than an animal. An angry roar came from the door. When Shenyuan Jingxian heard the familiar voice, he couldn't be bothered to turn around. He laughed indulgently and said, Qing Feng, I heard that the bastard surnamed Yuan you thought so highly of is already half dead, so your mother's fate today will be your fate in a few years. Uncle has the patience to wait for that day. Uncle might even wonder if Qing Feng already has a young daughter by the time he reaches 60 years of age. In the past, I didn't understand the meaning of the words enjoying the blessings of the land alone on the stone tablet. But now I understand that this kind of blessings is truly something that only immortals can enjoy. Shenyuan Qing Feng stood at the door, his fingernails digging into his palms. When she saw her daughter, a trace of panic finally flashed through the woman's eyes. She coldly said, Qing Feng, leave this place. Shenyuan Jingxian clicked his tongue and laughed. What a touching mother-daughter relationship. Chapter 302. A series of untimely coughs could be heard. Shenyuan Jingxian was stunned and slowly turned around. When he saw a figure appear in the doorway, he was subconsciously startled, but he was immediately amused by his own panic. He stood next to the large glazed vat and unbridled guffawed. The reason why he was surprised was because Shenyuan Jingxian knew that anyone could set foot in this large sex inner court except for the man at the doorway. And that man just so happened to be the husband of the woman behind Shenyuan Jingxian. How absurd was this? Back then, his wife in her prime would rather dual cultivate with the old ancestor, causing the eldest son of the first wife to become a laughingstock. She would rather stare blankly at a yellowed portrait for 20 years than look directly at her husband. No one would believe it even if he told them. Shenyuan Jingxian, who was on the verge of tears from laughing, wiped the corners of his eyes with a sinister expression. He remembered the warm scene of the 3 brothers standing on the Aspiration Cauldron Pavilion's river-gazing platform when they were children, standing on their tiptoes and leaning against the railing. He clearly remembered that his eldest brother said that he wanted to be a civil official whose name would go down in history. His second brother said that he wanted to revive the family's prestige and surpass the Wu family sword tomb, and Shenyuan Jingxian declared that he wanted to be a martial artist like Wang Xianji who could smash the enlightened masters of Longhu into meat patties with a single punch. The 3 brothers were still as close as brothers at that time, but after they grew up, the 3 of them had completely different futures. Second brother Shenyuan Jingyi had the demeanor of a great general and was clever in all aspects, absorbing many forces in Jianghu that could not be underestimated. Shenyuan Jingxian himself had made great strides on the martial path and was now on the verge of stepping into the Grandmaster realm. His future achievements would only be greater than his father's. But as for his eldest brother, despite the great expectations and resources the old ancestor had bestowed upon him, he was still a useless piece of trash who could only be submissive when speaking to others and would only retreat when arguing with others. In the Shenyuan family, where martial arts were highly valued, how could a martial arts fanatic like Shenyuan Jingxian respect an older brother who had never touched a sword or a staff and only knew how to hold a few books? After coughing, the middle-aged scholar still did not enter the courtyard. He covered his mouth and said vaguely, Jingxian, you should have waited a little longer. Unfortunately, you've never had much patience since you were young. This is not good. Shenyuan Jingxian seemed to have heard the funniest joke in the world. He had just stopped laughing when he couldn't help but laugh again. He placed his hands on his agate belt and looked straight at his sickly older brother, Shenyuan Jingqing. Eldest brother, what do you think I should have waited? Should I have waited for you to become the head of the family with your righteousness and morals? Should I have waited for my niece to become a pitiful cauldron furnace, or should I have waited for my fathers to run out again? Jingshuan's father, Jingshuan's father. But eldest is, use, my eldest, even my s. Is Tus's. Shenyuan Jingqing loosened his grip and nodded. Go on. Shenyuan Jingxian chuckled. I've endured it for many years and I really don't want to endure it any longer. 2. Shenyuan Qingfeng's expression changed drastically. The pale-faced scholar slowly said, but you know that this kind of excessive enthusiasm is like a tree without roots. It has no long-term benefits to the martial path. Shenyuan Jingxian rubbed his stomach and sneered. You sure are sincere when you say these words. It enlightens me. My stomach hurts from laughing. Shenyuan Jingqing turned to look in the direction of Bull Landing and murmured, Mount Hui will only be cleaner when it snows heavily in winter. Our family is really too dirty. Shenyuan Qingfeng extended his hand and motioned for his mother to leave the courtyard and stay away from his uncle who had reached the finger-profound realm. But the woman did not move. She would never approach that man of her own accord. The middle-aged scholar stared deeply at her and smiled faintly. There was an indescribable sense of open-mindedness and relief. He, who had never set foot in this courtyard, actually walked over the threshold for the first time. She and Shenyuan Qingfeng were both dazed. Shenyuan Jingxian still had a disapproving and arrogant expression. He sneered, Big brother, what? Are you going to beat me with a book? Shenyuan Jingqing shook his head. Mount Hui cannot be built without destruction. Shenyuan Great Pan has already led Mount Hui down a fork in the road. Today, I will turn it back on the right path. In terms of martial talent, you and Shenyuan Jingqing cannot compare to me. You are the finger-profound realm, so I will kill you with the finger-profound realm. The middle-aged scholar spoke unhurriedly. The sleeves of his wide green robe fluttered elegantly. The mother and daughter only saw this man who had stood aloof from worldly affairs his entire life walk straight toward Shenyuan Jingxian. He seemed to be walking slowly, but he arrived in front of Shenyuan Jingxian in the blink of an eye. Shenyuan Jingxian, who was clearly already at the finger-profound realm, widened his eyes. The middle-aged scholar grabbed him by the neck with one hand and continued walking. They passed through the large glazed vat and arrived at the rear courtyard. The scholar stopped and threw Shenyuan Jingxian into the room. His body exploded in midair. The middle-aged scholar, who was bleeding slightly from his 7 orifices, turned around. He seemed to want to reach out and touch his wife, but in the end, he did not have the courage. When he passed by his daughter at the entrance of the courtyard, he said softly, Qingfeng, from now on, you will take care of your mother. The woman suddenly shouted, Shenyuan Jingqing, where are you going? The middle-aged scholar continued walking and smiled warmly. To Bull's Descent Snow Field. After sweeping this house clean, you will be truly free. The saints said that if you do not sweep a house, how can you sweep the world? Unfortunately, Shenyuan Jingqing can only reach this step in this lifetime. Shenyuan Jingqing does not regret marrying you back then. Chapter 303. Dead. Inside the room, Shenyuan Jingxian couldn't be any more dead. Even the legendary Earth Immortals wouldn't be able to survive if their sea of qi exploded and all their meridians exploded. Outside the room, the woman stared blankly at the shattered glass vat. More than a dozen red carps were hidden among the green leaves of the lotus flowers. Just now, the two of them had passed through the vat in an instant, causing thousands of pounds of water to pour out and wet her embroidered silk shoes. What a cool autumn day. The autumn wind and autumn chill spread from the soles of her feet to her entire body. Shenyuan Qingfeng leaned weakly against the door. Even though she had always been praised by her elders for being able to remain calm during major events, she had lost the ability to think. Her mind was blank. No matter how immoral her uncle, Shenyuan Jingxian, was, after all, a genuine top-notch martial artist. He had cultivated a Vajra physique for several decades by following the prescribed order. In Mount Hui, he was publicly recognized as second only to the great ancestor and Shenyuan Guoqi, who possessed immortal qi. He had even claimed to have entered the mysterious Finger Xian realm. So what if he had just entered the Finger Xian realm and his foundation was still unstable? Only after reaching the Finger Xian realm could one truly become a towering tree that stood tall in the martial arts world. Taoist enlightened masters had hopes of ascending, Living Buddhas of Buddhism could become Sariras, and unaffiliated martial artists outside of the three religions were even more ferocious and domineering. How did he die in the blink of an eye? Shenyuan Qingfeng was limited by her mediocre talent and constitution, so she wasn't suitable for martial arts. However, she had read many secret manuals since she was a child and was used to seeing experts fight. She especially had a photographic memory, so her eyes were very sharp. She could see that after Shenyuan Jingxian lost focus for a moment, he actually wanted to kill his opponent very quickly. However, his opponent didn't give him the chance at all. There was probably no way to die in peace more than this. As a finger xian expert, he was casually walked up to him and killed in a single move. In that instant, Shenyuan Qingfeng saw through some secrets. Shenyuan Jingshuan's body was like that of a Buddhist heavenly king's Vajra. Although he was still 2 levels away from the celestial phenomenon realm, where both the inside and outside of his body were in harmony with the world, at the very least, his body had already formed a majestic image of its own. The reason why it was shattered with a single strike seemed to be because after being grabbed by the neck, Shenyuan Jingxian had used a tyrannical and vicious method to guide the flow of qi. It was like the tortoise and serpent of the northern black tortoise entangling with each other, which ultimately caused his meridians to explode inch by inch. Shenyuan Qingfeng wanted to say something, but hesitated. His lips trembled as he realized that he didn't know what to say. When she saw that her mother was about to turn around and enter the house, she finally gathered her courage and asked, "Mother, are we really not going to Bull's Descent Snowfield?" The woman turned her head and asked, "Are we going to see how Shenyuan Jingqing seeks death?" Shenyuan Qingfeng muttered to himself, "Since father was able to kill Shenyuan Jingxian, it's not impossible for him to." She stepped over the threshold and didn't even look at the badly mutilated corpse. She smiled and said, "So what? If Shenyuan Jingqing is not the Shenyuan Jingqing that we mother and son know, I will regret it so much that my intestines turn green, and I will cry like a weeping beauty to beg him to change his mind. Afterwards, we will treat each other with respect and grow old together at Mount Hui." Tears streamed down Shenyuan Qingfeng's face. "Mother, you really don't feel the slightest bit of heartache?" She smiled and said, I have long since forgotten the feeling of heartache. If you want to go, then go to Snowfield. Mother wants to be alone for a while." An old mama who had watched Shenyuan Qingfeng grow up hurriedly rushed over and respectfully reported, "Madam Miss, for some reason, Lord has gone to Snowfield alone." At the foot of the mountain, someone claimed that Lord had invited him to Bull's Descent Snowfield as a guest. It seems to be that domineering heir of Bailiang. He has already begun to climb the mountain and will soon arrive at East Sect. Those who blocked the way at the estate were all torn apart by an unremarkable youth. His methods were extremely swift and fierce. Rumor has it that the divine swordsman Li Chungang who humiliated our Shenyuan family in the past was also among them. Second Master has already brought people to stop them. After climbing the Bull's Descent Snowfield, there was a jade passageway paved with 300 steps, and a memorial arch built across the road. This was Mount Hui's Shenyuan Sect's E-Sect. The words, "Reach the Peak of Perfection," were written on the plaque, and the words, "Martial Dao Contract Kunlun," were written on it. Their neighbor, Mount Longhu, also had a similar structure. All civil and military officials had to dismount from their horses in front of the tablet to demonstrate the reverence of the ancestral court of Taoism. When it came to Mount Hui, it was a reminder to all the Zhonghu people who came to visit to voluntarily remove their swords and sabers. It wasn't that there weren't arrogant and boorish martial artists who didn't want to follow the rules, but those who succeeded like Li Chungang could be counted on one's fingers. The vast majority of them were thrown off the Bull's Descent Snowfield. The sallow and emaciated Su Longxiang was in a killing frenzy. He was simply invincible. Chapter 304. One must know that Mount Hui was said to be home to nearly 1,000 martial arts elites. The Shenyuan family dominated the southeast and could be divided into several types of people. The first type was the direct descendants of the family, who were born with the surname Shenyuan. This branch was led by the third branch of the Mount Hui family. Under the head of the family, Shenyuan Guoqi, there were Shenyuan Jingxian and Shenyuan Jingxian supporting the family. Together, they formed the most luxuriant martial arts tree in the southeast of the dynasty. These people had the innate advantage of being close to the family. Based on their bloodline and talent in martial arts, they could go to the Wending Pavilion to obtain secret manuals. Then there were the lackeys that Shenyuan had raised with both secret manuals and a lot of money. There were 2 kinds of lackeys. Those who were of noble status were guests and enjoyed good treatment in Mount Huishan. Those who came from humble backgrounds and were not strong enough had to work hard for the Shen Yuan family with their tails between their legs in order to earn a living. If Yuan Tingshan did not have a relationship with Shen Yuan Qingfeng, he would belong to this camp and had to rely on his own ability to get what he wanted. Then there were the private forces that Shen Yuan had carefully cultivated. There were two main forces. One was made up of 200 cavalrymen and 50 heavy cavalrymen who had spent a lot of money. The other was made up of 150 light cavalrymen, who were relatively cheaper. The other group was made up of loyal men of sacrifice. Their identities were complicated. Some of them were warriors or rangers who had fled to Hui Mountain to seek refuge. Most of them were assassins who had been slowly cultivated by Shen Yuan as pawns since they were young. Very few of them could live to 30 years of age, which showed how active the Shen Yuan family was in the southeast Jianghu. His Royal Highness and Huang Manor stood together under the E-gate. Beside them stood the old man with the sheepskin fur coat. Blue Bird held the instant spear. Behind them were the halberd Ning Amei and 100 white horses. Near the two gates were a crowd of people. Sabers, spears, staffs, and all kinds of weapons were present. Shen Yuan Jingxian stood on the steps with a gloomy expression. Close to 100 archers with outstanding arm strength held the geographical advantage, ready to shoot. More than 30 guests had turned out in full force. They were all experts who had been famous in the Jianghu for a long time. Su Fengnian clicked his tongue and sighed. What a turbulent Jianghu. Dark clouds had already gathered overhead, and there was actually a sign of heavy rain. A few decades later, Old Man Li, who was now one-armed and without a sword, dozed off while standing. He did not say a word. Su Fengnian turned his head and asked, "How far is it from here to the thieves' lair?" The elderly god of swords opened his eyes slightly and said lazily, "It's not too far." Outside of Bull Landing, there was a large piece of flat land, which was the snow plateau. If I'm not mistaken, Shen Yuan Jingqing will have a fight with Shen Yuan Pan there. It is indeed a good place for people to die. Su Fengnian felt a headache coming on. There are so many first and second-rate experts and a few hundred men of sacrifice. How are we going to get past them? Li Chungang grumpily said, "This old man can easily pass through by himself. As for you, if you want to fight force with force, then you'll have to wait to die here. Do you think that the foundation of a large clan that has been established for hundreds of years is just for show?" Su Fengnian whispered, "To catch bandits, first catch the ringleader?" The elderly god of swords thought for a while and said, "You mean to take down Shen Yuan Jingqing?" Su Fengnian smiled and nodded, eager to give it a try. The elderly god of swords rubbed his chin and narrowed his eyes. If this old man were to personally take action, it would be simple. However, without this old man's effort, you'll just sit back and watch the show. Kid, let Huang Man, or yell first to show your strength and tear a few people apart before talking about anything else. Then, let this girl beside you, who can play anything but the instant spear, hold the fort. When this old man will take action, it will depend on his mood. Don't worry, I won't make you wait too long." This old man was also very curious about how high Shen Yuan Jingqing could reach if he did not hesitate to exchange his life for his realm. It was not too rare for heavenly phenomenon experts to fight each other, but it would be interesting if both of them were trapped in a situation where they would fight to the death. If half a land immortal accidentally popped out, it would be a feast for the eyes. Kid, you don't have any other abilities, but you're just so at stealing from others. Looking at Huang Man or taking large strides forward, the elderly god of swords said with slight sadness, "This old man's painstaking efforts back then have been wasted." Shen Yuan Jingqing finally appeared after much difficulty, yet he still rebelled. This big tree has been hollowed out in the hands of Shen Yuan Jingqing. In the end, it is still going to fall. Great Snow Plateau. The middle-aged scholar walked slowly against the wind. His sleeves fluttered in the wind, making him stand out from the crowd. After enduring silently for 20 years, he finally revealed his loftiness at this moment. Along the way, he kept coughing and blood seeped out. No one could see through him. Shen Yuan Jingqing thought of many things, good and bad, honor and disgrace, ups and downs. Shen Yuan Jingqing stopped and looked at the tall figure at the end of the Great Snow Plateau. He muttered, "I've finally reached here." That figure was abnormally tall and sturdy. This was an old man with a technique to retain his youthful appearance. The old man who had a head full of white hair 20 years ago actually had black hair at his temples. He stood at the entrance of Bull Descendants' mansion without a smile. one man guarding the pass with a majestic aura. This old ancestor, the only one on Mount Hui who had the qualifications to say that he enjoyed the land's blessings alone, had a sharp gaze and a loud voice. Jingqing, have you ever read To Resonate with Heaven and Earth? His deep voice surged in the great snow plateau. There was a string of wind chimes hanging under the eaves of Bull Descendant's house. Because of the strong wind at the peak of the mountain, they jingled all year round. At this moment, it was silent. Like a person who was about to die with his neck strangled. Shenyuan Jingqing said calmly, whether it is a celestial phenomenon or not, we'll know after we try. The old man who had been in charge of the Shenyuan family for 60 years was able to return to his original state after nearly 20 years. He laughed heartily and said, I'd like to see if this unfilial descendant of yours can endure 100 moves. Shenyuan Jingqing, who no longer needed to painstakingly suppress his realm, raised his hand. He stepped out with his right foot and bent his left foot slightly. He stretched out one hand and pulled back the other. It was too wonderful for words. In an instant, the dark clouds in the sky spun like a tornado and suddenly descended. Shenyuan Jingqing said softly, I shake Kunlun. Chapter 305. If Shenyuan Jingxian was said to be an unsheathed sword, then Shenyuan Jingjing was a blunt saber. Although it was not as sharp, it was more useful to the clan. Shenyuan Jingshuan's temperament was not suited to dealing with people. That eldest grandson of his, who was always elusive, only knew how to study, so many heavy responsibilities naturally fell on Shenyuan Jingjing's shoulders. He welcomed guests from all over the world and was adept at nurturing soldiers. The second branch's position had risen over the years, becoming more and more stable. Out of 10 guest officials, Shenyuan Jingxian was in charge of 200 cavalry. When the heroes of the nearby provinces mentioned him, they would all raise their thumbs and praise him for being a timely rain from Jiangdong. There was once a beautiful servant who made fun of a lame martial artist who came up the mountain out of admiration. The latter descended the mountain in shame and indignation. When Shenyuan Jingxian heard this, he immediately cut off the head of his favored servant and carried it down the mountain to beg for forgiveness. At that time, this martial artist was just a nobody in Jianghu. But now he was a guest official of Mount Hui. The generation with the surname Jing was divided into 3 branches, and the distribution of resources was always going to be uneven, so there was no such thing as keeping pace. The eldest grandson, Shenyuan Jingqing, was already recognized as a withered tree with sparse branches and leaves, without any shade to speak of. Shenyuan Jingxian was too domineering, even daring to say that he would eat dumplings and eat sisters-in-law. Coupled with his self-confidence in his grandmaster realm, it was hard to avoid suspicion that he was 1,000 miles away from others. Did Shenyuan Jingjing have any thoughts of moving into Yunyu town in the future? Now that he was riding a tiger, it was hard to get off. He himself did not want to, but with everyone propping him up on the bonfire, it seemed that he had no choice but to fight for it. In the family, there were only free and unfettered dogs, but no free and unfettered people. His eldest brother, Shenyuan Jingqing, had already given him the desolate fate of not fighting for it. Shenyuan Jingshuan's appearance was dignified, and when he was young, he was known as an elegant young master of Jiangdong. However, his temperament was honest, and his sharpness was restrained, so it was very easy for people to feel close to him. At this moment, Shenyuan Jingxian had a headache as he faced off against those uninvited Bailiang barbarians, but he wasn't afraid. He had more than 100 archers by his side, and their arm strength was undoubtedly much better than that of ordinary soldiers. A volley of arrows rained down like water. What's more, the guests of Mount Huishan had heard that it was Ren Tu's son who had ascended the mountain. They were united against a common enemy. Even those from Third Brother's side had rushed over after hearing the news. In Shenyuan Jingzong's opinion, if the other side did not have the support of the old divine swordsman Li Chungang, it would be like using a butcher's knife to kill a chicken. Li Chungang was single-handedly wielding a spear and riding a horse. No matter how old he was, how could the 30 guests not be able to surround him? However, there were many things in this world that could not be explained by ordinary reasoning. In a chess game that he was certain to win, Shenyuan Jingxian did not dare to be too presumptuous. If he really got carried away and accidentally slaughtered that Bailiang heir, what good would that do for Mount Hui? Shenyuan Jingxian gazed at His Royal Highness under the Yi sect. There was a great disparity in numbers between the two sides. Since victory was already in his grasp, he only needed to control the strength of his blows. Shenyuan Jingshuan's thoughts drifted. He was confident that his martial arts talent was not inferior to his younger brothers, but these past few years, his father, Shenyuan Jingxian, had devoted most of his time to the sword. Most of the year, he was either in seclusion or exploring secluded places in search of otherworldly experts to sharpen his swordsmanship. Shenyuan Jingxian poured his heart and soul into managing an aristocratic family, so it was inevitable that his martial arts cultivation would be delayed. In his youth, his eldest brother, Shenyuan Jingxian, had not touched martial arts other than a few techniques to strengthen his body. Shenyuan Jingxian and Shenyuan Jingxian were equally matched when it came to martial arts. After reaching the age of 30, Shenyuan Jingxian had even surpassed him. After reaching the no-doubt state, he had to worry about the trivial matters of the family, and it was only then that his third brother, Shenyuan Jingxian, gradually began to leave. How could Shenyuan Jingxian not hate his eldest brother? If it wasn't for the fact that Shenyuan Jingqing was unwilling to learn martial arts and take up the heavy responsibility. Thinking of this, Shenyuan Jingqing couldn't help but laugh at himself in his heart. 10 years ago, he was still secretly grateful to Big Brother Ling for not fighting for power. It was only later that he realized that the glamorous position that seemed to be in his hands was neither enticing nor reliable. The guests on the bull mound were divided into 3 distinct groups. Those who had clearly joined Shenyuan Jingqing and Shenyuan Jingshuan's camps were split into 2 groups. The rest were still undecided. The situation of who the next family head would fall into was still unclear. This group of Jianghu bigwigs clearly decided that they wouldn't act unless they saw a rabbit. Birds of a feather flocked together. The guests of Mount Hui besides Shenyuan Jingqing all had relatively gentle personalities. They all had good reputations in Jianghu. They belonged to the type of heroes who eliminated evil and eliminated evil. Each of them was awe-inspiring righteous. When they saw His Royal Highness and his group walking up the mountain, they all showed expressions of righteous indignation. On the other hand, Shenyuan Jingshuan's group was the complete opposite. Most of them were fugitives who had fled into the mountains in search of protection, and they were all infamous for their ferocity. Among them, there were a few bandits who were among the best in the southeastern region of the dynasty, and there was also a notorious flower picker. The last group was both good and evil. They didn't adhere to morals. They were called the martial loose men by the orthodox people in the imperial court who had a good impression of Jianghu. These people usually didn't do great evil. When they felt like it, they would do some good deeds. Over time they had accumulated some reputation. At this time, the 2 guests' gazes met and then immediately looked away, as if they were disgusted. Shenyuan Jingxian inwardly smiled. This was the result of his deliberate management. The number of guests in Mount Hui was astonishing, and most of them were quite strong. Even those who were mediocre in martial arts had some strange skills. However, Mount Hui spent a lot of money to give these guests a comfortable and luxurious life. If they wanted women, they gave them women. If they wanted secret manuals, they gave them secret manuals. But the important figures of Mount Hui had a clear account book in their bellies. There were only 7 or 8 people who really caught the eye of Buldagong. Among these people, the chief guest Huang Fengfua and the second guest Hong Yu were the most worthy to be accepted. Hong Yu was the lame son of a nameless soldier. This person didn't disappoint Shenyuan Jingshuan's expectations. In Mount Hui Blessed Land, where geniuses were everywhere, his martial arts talent didn't lose to Shenyuan Jingshuan's. His cultivation improved by leaps and bounds. Because of Hong Yu's heroic character and heroic spirit, he was the most popular among the guests. Not only that, Hong Yu was also proficient in the art of war. After he was given the power to command the cavalry, he helped the entire second branch, which allowed the second branch to suppress the third branch. He could be said to be Shenyuan Jingshuan's lucky general. The chief guest of Mount Hui, Huang Fengfua, was the #1 martial artist in Jianghu. He was close to the realm of Grandmaster. When he encountered a big bottleneck in martial arts, he came to Mount Hui just to borrow secret manuals. Under normal circumstances, Buldagong wouldn't ask Huang Fengfua to do anything. After all, guests weren't like the lackeys of the family who came and went as they pleased. These experts mostly followed the rules of guests who stayed and left if they didn't. Moreover, the most difficult people to serve in the world were the literati and experts. The originally arrogant and domineering Mount Hui was cultivated under Shenyuan Jingxian. For more than 10 years, they had been pursuing harmony and wealth. They didn't want to bully their customers. This unknowingly increased the status and arrogance of the guests, and their tempers became more and more crafty. How many people could be like Shenyuan Jingxian, who killed a concubine in order to win people's hearts? Huang Fengfu was also a very smart person. He was proficient in all kinds of martial arts. He had reached a higher level early and rarely met a worthy opponent in Jianghu. However, he was suppressed under the realm of Grandmaster. He couldn't understand why. During this period, he risked his life to go to the western regions and Beimang. However, he still couldn't reach the realm that seemed to be within reach. Finally, on the Spring God Lake, he had a sword discussion with Shenyuan Jingqi. They appreciated each other's talent and were invited to Mount Hui. Now, Huang Fengfu was the leader of the martial artists. He only treated Shenyuan Jingxian and Shenyuan Jingxian with respect, but didn't see each other with sincerity. Instead, he often drank wine and talked about history with the useless guy of the eldest branch. A big clan that was committed to dominating Jianghu naturally had its own petty interests. However, it also had a grand plan to look at the entire Jianghu. Huang Manor walked to the open space in the middle of the square with his bare hands. Shenyuan Jingqi had already received the news that this skinny young man had killed more than 10 people on his way up the mountain. Their hands and feet were all torn apart while they were still alive. Shenyuan Jingqi was the flag of Mount Hui when his ancestor and father weren't present. He lived like a prince in a high position. He cared about his face the most. He wanted to show His Royal Highness who was in his power. He coldly said, "Release the arrows." The bowstring released an ear-piercing buzzing sound. The arrows flew like locusts towards the young man who didn't know whether he was dead or alive. The first-grade initial realm of Vajra was derived from the teachings of Buddhism. It meant that the Buddha's body was immortal. The Vajra Dharma body was known as the strongest body in the 3 realms. Immortal Lu Dongxian once wrote a crooked poem, having obtained the 3 pure immortality technique, having obtained the Vajra Dharma body. He said that this poem was crooked because it mixed up Buddhism and Taoism. However, the younger generation didn't dare to look down on it. Thus, the Vajra realm was seen as the minor immortality realm in Taoism. It was to show the difference between great immortality and great immortality. Most of the pre-celestial cultivators who reached the Vajra realm used the energy in their body to borrow the power of the immovable Kunlun. They were invulnerable to weapons and axes. Below celestial phenomenon, the Vajra finger and Shen finger were the same. Li Chungang said that there were as many Vajra realm experts as there were hairs on a cow. He really overestimated the current Jianghu. It was because of His Royal Highness that ordinary people wouldn't be able to see a Vajra realm expert show off their skills. They wouldn't even be able to see a master realm expert who was only a step away from the first-grade realm. The arrow drew an arc in the air and went straight for Huang Manor. A martial artist who was proficient in archery would be much more accurate and powerful than an ordinary archer. Shenyuan Jingyi squinted his eyes and waited quietly. The young man couldn't dodge in time and was shot like a porcupine. Hong Piao was born with a short stature. In terms of appearance, he wasn't very eye-catching. He was worlds apart from the head honcho Huang Fengfu. However, Hong Piao was bold and meticulous. He was a typical boorish man who could embroider. Seeing the rain of arrows flying towards him, he said worriedly, "Sir, I heard that old Celestial Master Zhao secretly took in a disciple. It's the young prince of Bailiang. His martial arts foundation is extraordinary. Could it be this person? If he angered Bailiang Palace and Mount Longhu at the same time, wouldn't there be endless trouble?" Shenyuan Jingyi laughed softly. "You guessed that he's the young prince of Bailiang, but I don't know. Moreover, since he's Zhao Shituan's disciple, he should have some power. Otherwise, do you really think that the Great Bull Gang is like the taverns and tea houses at the foot of the mountain that you can come and go as you please?" Shenyuan Jingyi and Hong Piao were both stunned. Chapter 306. The flying locusts fell from the sky aggressively. There was no sign of the young man's chi dynamic. He did not dodge and reached out to deflect a few arrows. Those that could not be deflected in time were shot at his body. However, the arrows that were shot at him were all broken as if they hit a metal rock. It was the result of hitting a rock with an egg. A few arrows that were calculated in the direction of the young man's escape hit the ground and created a burst of sparks. It was obvious that the archer's strength was great and the arrow's momentum was fierce. This made the scene even more strange. Since the young man did not use chi dynamic to strengthen his body, how could he deflect those arrows? The guests of Mount Hui who knew their stuff looked at each other in dismay. Huang Fengfu said indifferently, "What a good-born Vajra state. In the past, I only heard the seniors talk about strange things and I did not dare to believe it. Today I have opened my eyes. At the edge of the guests, there was a handsome man who was waving a fan in autumn. Although he had a pair of peach blossom eyes, there was an evil aura around him. There were more than 10 women painted on the front and back of the fan with their names and families written on it. There were more than 20 words to describe their romance. These women were all under his evil clutches. There were more than 10 fan of beauty and they were all carefully kept. They said that they were to be passed on to their descendants as family heirlooms. This self-proclaimed master of love and painting had been unrestrained in these years. If he had not poisoned a county chief's daughter 2 years ago and completely angered the government, he would not have come to Mount Hui to live under people's skin. The mountain was not as happy as the foot of the mountain. It was true that Mount Hui had beautiful mountains and clear waters and beautiful women, but this land's happiness was exclusive to the direct descendants of Xianxia. He had been dissatisfied for a long time and complained a lot. This person's reputation was extremely bad. It was hard to imagine that such a perverted thief who everyone wanted to kill could write so many heroic poems that said, "Life is only 100 years, but to scold to one's heart's content for eternity." When he saw the young man who was said to be the heir of Bailiang with a sword, he was quite displeased. There were 2 kinds of people he hated the most in his life. One was ugly women who would dirty his eyes. The other was men who were more handsome than him. He could ignore the former, but the latter would most likely be tortured by him until they were disabled. The young man's strength was amazing, but he thought about it and saw that the young man's expression was dull and dull. He felt that he was just a brute. He was not afraid of this at all. To be a flower thief, the most important skill was to be able to escape. Therefore, his lightness skill could be ranked at the top of Mount Hui where there were many masters. He felt that staying in Mount Hui was really boring. Some of the beautiful women were divided up and could only be seen but not eaten. It was too annoying. Mount Hui was full of hidden dragons and crouching tigers. Climbing over the wall to pick flowers was no different from suicide. It was better to go down the mountain and out of sight. 2 years had passed and he was almost out of the limelight. It was time for him to reappear in Jianghu. Those juniors who only knew how to secretly use aphrodisiac to ravage women were really a disgrace to him. Flowers were not to be picked like this. The highest level of flower picking was to pick them and enjoy them before planting them back in the pot. This way, they would be more delicate and beautiful than rashly breaking them and losing their vitality. Since he was going down the mountain, he had been eating and drinking well in the Bulgang for 2 years. He had to return a favor. Today's situation was tricky. He was sure that many of the guests in Mount Hui were afraid of the king of Bailiang's name and did not dare to make a move. But he was different. Behind the mountain, I don't care if you're the king of heaven or a different surname. Huang Manor turned around and looked at Su Fengnian. After getting permission from his eyes, he started to run. You're not allowed to use such a desperate move like the Overlord's armor removal. If you can't beat us, then run. It's okay to lose face. As long as there's life, there's hope. Sooner or later, we'll be able to get back at you. His Royal Highness turned around and teased Blue Bird. As he spoke, he felt a little regretful. It was a pity that Wen Hua wasn't present. Otherwise, in such a lively scene, he might not be good at fighting, but his scolding skills were definitely at the peak. He could scold people until smoke came out of their 7 orifices. His 18 generations of ancestors, generation after generation, he wouldn't repeat half a word. Su Fengnian, who had learned a lot of verbal skills from the village women, had to admit that he was inferior and was unwilling to admit defeat. That year, when he met Shenyuan Qingfeng, whom he mistakenly thought was Shenyuan Qingfeng, it was nothing more than a fart of 2 debauches refusing to give way to a well-bred young lady. Fighting was nothing more than swallowing the humiliation. But that bastard Wen Hua's mouth was really undisciplined and out of control. He called a dog his father and called her mother. He even spouted nonsense about how her armpit hair had a body odor that could smoke mosquitoes. He even did the vulgar action of taking off his pants and revealing his 2 buttocks in public. Even if Shenyuan Qingfeng was a bodhisattva with a good temper, he would still get angry and beat him up. This time, on this trip to Mount Hui, he didn't have Wen Hua, who was comparable to a land immortal in terms of quarreling skills, to accompany him. Blue Bird held her spear and rushed out. Her figure wasn't as surprising as Huang Manor's. First it was the foolish youth, then it was the delicate girl. Other than that old god of swords, Li Chungang, this Bailiang prince didn't have any other capable experts? Long Xuanyu followed the rules and asked Shenyuan Jingyi to fight. Almost at the same time, a guest elder with firm and fierce fist techniques also stepped out. Long Yuxuan saw the green-clothed female servant coming over with her spear. Shenyuan Jingyi didn't need him to say anything and signaled Long Yuxuan to deal with that impetuous girl. The youth was handed over to another guest elder to capture. The outcome was decided. Shenyuan Jingyi could be considered to have guessed the outcome, but the outcome was already decided on his side. Chapter 307. It was unknown if the guest elder, who was famous for his fist techniques, had underestimated him, but in just one exchange, he was forcefully blocked by that young man's fists. His body didn't move, but his feet sank deep into the shattered floor. Then with a punch, the guest elder's head was chopped off. It wasn't accurate to say that it was chopped off. The entire head was smashed away by the young man. The scene was extremely bloody and cold. Long Yuxuan, who was laughing loudly and floating towards the lady in green, was about to tease her when he caught a glimpse of this scene from the corner of his eye. He was so frightened that he swallowed his words. As expected, the spear suddenly swung down and cut a 2-meter-long crack on the ground. Fortunately, he moved quickly. Otherwise, wouldn't that spear be like a watermelon being cut by a knife? That lady let the entire Mount Hui know what it meant to have a spear technique that was as strong as a swimming snake and explosive thunder. Long Xuanyu's Qinggong was undoubtedly excellent, but that red spear moved like a shadow. As long as the spear touched the ground, countless stones would be shattered. Even if it swept through the air, it would still make a whistling sound. The experienced and knowledgeable Huang Fengfua was once again shocked when he saw the young man who was born with Vajra. He muttered, "The spear Immortal King embroidery has finally appeared? But that's fine, but how can a young lady be so domineering?" Su Fengnian had been glancing at the old man with the sheepskin fur coat. If he didn't take advantage of everyone's shock to take down the leader of the bandits, Shenyuan Chongyi, it would be a good opportunity to squander. Li Chungang rolled his eyes and said, "My heart aches for that daughter. This old man doesn't understand. You clearly care about her so much, so why don't you eat her up? To a woman, this kind of care is the most practical." Su Fengnian flew into a rage out of humiliation. "Cut the crap, senior, make a move." The old god of swords raised his chin and said in annoyance, "Wait a while more, look over there." Su Fengnian looked in the direction and saw Shenyuan Qingfeng walking over slowly. She said to Shenyuan Chongyi in a clear voice, "My father invited His Royal Highness to Bull Hill to view the scenery and has already obtained the permission of the old ancestor." The moment she said that, there was a commotion. Shenyuan Chongyi frowned and said, "Qingfeng, don't mess around." It was obvious that he saw this niece's words as a fake imperial edict. Shenyuan Qingfeng said calmly, "Uncle, if you don't believe me, you can go and ask the ancestor yourself." Shenyuan Gong narrowed his eyes and smiled. "That won't be necessary. However, His Royal Highness wants to make friends through martial arts. Let's wait until the fight is over." He turned to the second guest chamberlain and said, "Brother Hong, are you going to spar with that junior? Only with you personally leading the formation will we be able to show the sincerity of Mount Hui's hospitality." Hong Piao was expressionless as he prepared to attack. Shenyuan Jingyi, on the other hand, was observing the subtle changes in his niece's expression from the corner of his eye. He didn't have any good feelings towards Shenyuan Qingfeng. As a woman, she wanted to seize power from him, her own uncle. She truly had a heart higher than the heavens and a life thinner than paper. Shenyuan Jingzong waited until she spoke, and concluded that Yuan Tingshan, who was exhaling more than inhaling, had been abandoned by his niece. Instead, he had turned to cling to the thigh of the heir of Bailiang, hoping to borrow an external force to contend against the mansion of the old ancestor. However, did this infamous His Royal Highness have the ability to challenge the old ancestor? However, Shenyuan Jingyi understood his niece's feelings. After all, to any woman, entering and leaving Mansion of the Bull was a completely different world. Shenyuan Qingfeng's mind was already in turmoil, and she was wholeheartedly focused on smashing a broken jar. Naturally, she didn't care about Shenyuan Jingyi's erroneous guesses. In the backyard of the eldest branch, a young woman with a cold expression quietly watched the wine stove that was gradually heating up. The wine's name was Angelica, and it was sandwiched between tea leaves from Mount Hui's old tea before the rain, as well as osmantha seeds picked every mid-autumn festival. The wine's color was golden and translucent, with a hint of green. The wine's aroma was a combination of tea and osmanthus. It was slightly bitter in the mouth, but when tasted carefully, it lingered for a long time with an endless aftertaste. This wine had the meaning of, after bitterness comes sweetness. But it wasn't popular in Mount Hui. Mount Hui was also known as Yaozhao Mountain. In the ancient book, Classic of Mountains and Seas, it was recorded that Yaozhao Mountain had many osmanthus trees. However, after the Shenyuan family occupied this blessed land, they enjoyed a peaceful life for several hundred years. Perhaps it was because their good fortune didn't last long, and their luck gradually decreased, causing the old osmanthus trees to die one by one. Last year, even the only remaining osmanthus tree named Tangue, which had a lifespan longer than the 1,600 years of the Taoist master's residence on Mount Longhu, had withered. Therefore, apart from a few jars of wine brewed from the osmanthus seeds last year, this Angelica osmanthus wine had become extinct. Everyone in Mount Hui knew that the eldest son of the first wife, Shenyuan Jingqing, was an absurd person who was addicted to drinking Angelica osmanthus wine from the books of the sages. Chapter 308. Dark clouds loomed over the Great Snow Plateau. A storm was coming. Do you want to shake Kunlun? After hearing his grandson Shenyuan Jingqing's words, Shenyuan Depan raised his head and laughed heartily. He did not mind the imminent battle. This was not because Shenyuan Depan was conceited. He counted the opponents that the hunchbacked old man had challenged before. When he was 20 years old, he challenged the family's ancestor and caused him to be seriously injured. When he was 30 years old, he fought the spear Immortal Wuxia and was slightly inferior. When he was 40 years old, he single-handedly entered the sword tomb of the Wu family and forced the sword crown of that generation to use the flying sword technique. Although he was defeated, it was still a glorious defeat. After the Battle of the Sword Tomb, he comprehended swordsmanship for 10 years and was confident that his swordsmanship was comparable to that generation's sword god Li Chungang. Not to mention that Shenyuan Depan also competed with the immortal Qi Xuanzhen during this period of time. It was natural that he was defeated. However, if his cultivation was ordinary, why would Qi Xuanzhen, who had stayed on the demon-slaying platform all his life, fight? Shenyuan Depan seemed to have competed with others and lost every time. Therefore, he was mocked as Shenyuan Invincible. However, not to mention Qi Xuanzhen, the only person in 500 years who could compete with Ancestor Lu, and Li Chungang, who was invincible in the secular world at that time, even the most inconspicuous Gu Jiantang now had extraordinary swordsmanship. If he claimed to be second, no one dared to claim to be first. In this way, how many people dared to underestimate this ancestor of the Shenyuan family? Shenyuan Depan had lived for nearly 100 years. He was different from Li Chungang, whose realm was declining day by day and eventually could not recover. Generally speaking, he had been steadily improving. People predicted that he had reached the celestial state when Shenyuan Depan was in charge of the dynasty. In these years, he had devoted himself to dual cultivation and devoted himself to fusing Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism into one. With Shenyuan Depan's age and strength, it was not impossible for him to reach the realm of Earth Immortal. After Qi Xuanzhen ascended to immortality, there was no longer a Zhenren of this realm in Longhu Mountain. Once Shenyuan Depan achieved immortality, the hatred of the past would be returned to the ancestral court of Taoism. At that time, even if Gu Jiantang's swordsmanship was superb, how could he be a match for an Earth Immortal? Those who were well-informed speculated about Li Chuangong's ascension. The one-armed old man wanted to use Shenyuan Depan to establish his authority. Most of them were not optimistic about the old god of swords, whose realm had declined greatly. The busybodies of Jianghu had specially placed bets on the outcome of Li Chungang and the various first pin masters. Without exception, the odds were extremely high, indicating that they did not have high hopes for Li Chungang. As for the odds against Wang Xianji and the new god of swords, Dong Tai, the odds were about 5,000 taels of silver on Li Chuangong's victory. Jianghu was forgetful and fickle, just like the saying that scholars despised each other since ancient times. Shenyuan Depan's 10 years of seclusion showed that his realm had improved greatly. His sideburns had turned from white to black. It was a clear proof that he had returned to his original state. It was a mysterious sign of becoming an immortal Zhenren. When Qi Xuanzhen was slaying demons on Mount Longhu, he was 70 years old but his appearance was as handsome as a young man. Shenyuan Depan was not in a hurry to make a move. He had waited for 20 years and finally, this day had come. Usually, as he got older, his patience would get better. Xuanyuan Depan looked at his eldest grandson from afar, who was not tainted by worldly affairs. There was no emotion in his eyes. To him, blood relations could be heavy or light. If he was obedient and had the potential to become a dragon, then he would nurture him. If he was a good-for-nothing with mediocre roots, then even if he was his biological grandson, then he would simply abandon his intentions. Since when was Xuanyuan Depan the kind of elder who liked to play with his grandson? The joy of family relationships was not worth mentioning compared to his own immortality. He made an exception and gave this eldest grandson whom he had high hopes for another chance. The first time was during Xuanyuan Jingqing's coming-of-age ceremony. He asked him if he was willing to learn martial arts. Unfortunately, this stubborn child insisted on learning from Sun Ping of Zhejiang City. Xuanyuan Depan was really amazed by this grandson's talent. Even if he was an unpolished jade for the rest of his life, it would be good to just leave him at home and collect dust. Later on, Xuanyuan Jingqing met the woman in distress and returned to the mountain to beg for help from his family. Xuanyuan Depan then gave him another chance. However, this grandson who had wasted his talent actually refused again. Xuanyuan Depan was furious and no longer regarded him as his eldest grandson. He turned to nurture the less talented but ambitious Xuanyuan Jingxian. Later on, that woman actually took the initiative to ask for dual cultivation. Xuanyuan Depan was just going with the flow. Since he had decided to abandon Xuanyuan Jingqing, it was fine to have a young granddaughter-in-law who was suitable to be a human cauldron. Xuanyuan Pan looked indifferently at the tornado that was attracted by Xuanyuan Jingqing's abundant qi. It was in the shape of a giant funnel, and the root of the wind spun violently on the great snow plateau as if it reached the heavens. It continuously tore down the black clouds in the sky, becoming more and more intense. Xuanyuan Jingqing stretched out one hand and drew an arc, while his other hand slowly lifted upwards. He said softly, "Rise again." Another huge tornado appeared in the sky on the left side of the great snow plateau. The phenomenon of heaven and earth revolved around the dragon axis, causing endless wind and sand to blow. In one go, Xuanyuan Jingqing's aura skyrocketed, but it did not show any signs of weakening. He clenched his hands into fists, and his qi instantly climbed to the peak. He said slowly, "Rise 3 times." A tornado appeared on the right side. On the great snow plateau, 3 dragons draw water. Xuanyuan Pan's gray hair was messed up by the strong wind. He said calmly, "Stealing the power of heaven and earth, is this your heavenly phenomenon stage? This kind of opportunistic behavior is fine for scaring people, but if you want to hurt me, it's really laughable." Xuanyuan Jingqing did not say anything. The 3 tornadoes surged with heaven's might and quickly moved towards the motionless Xuanyuan Pan. The 3 dragons suddenly converged and pressed down on ancestor Hui Shan, who was in the center and did not bother to dodge. "Good timing." Xuanyuan Pan laughed loudly. His hands hooked into claws, and his left hand reached out into the 2 tornadoes. The vast sea of qi that contained the accumulation of nearly 100 years of internal energy began to exert its power, rolling like a boiling boiler. The reason why he looked down on Xuanyuan Jingqing's heavenly ability was related to Xuanyuan Pan's own cultivation. Generally speaking, the saints of the 3 sects each left behind bits and pieces of information for the future generations to figure out the great Tao. Among them, Zhang Suxing of the north proposed that reading books would nourish the righteous energy of heaven and earth, and also said that if the great people did not live in peace, they would be famous. Therefore, the experts who entered the great realm of martial arts through Confucianism were extremely good at resonating with heaven and earth, and using their own strength to stir up heaven's secrets. This was undoubtedly an extremely grand and magnificent scene, but in the eyes of Xuanyuan Pan, who used strength to prove his Tao, it was just a joke. This ancestor did not worship heaven and earth as a master, and only believed in his own 2 fists. He was the same as Li Chungang, who wanted to make the world tremble and gods weep when he used his sword. All the talk about not being able to achieve Tao and floating on the sea, and all the talk about suffering in this world and blessings in the future were all nonsense. The more Xuanyuan Pan studied the profound meaning of the 3 sects, the more firm he was in his original path. He had 2 hands, and even the immortals, Buddhas, demons, and demons had to obediently retreat and get lost. Moreover, Xuanyuan Pan had a clear goal, which proved that the path he chose was not only feasible, but also extremely correct. Wang Shenji of the Martial Emperor City. In today's world, there were only a handful of people who could fight with him, Xuanyuan Pan. Xuanyuan Jingqing, the useless abandoned son of the family, was not worthy. Xueqi Pan actually tore apart the two tornadoes. Without the foundation of the waterspouts, the black clouds at the top of the tornadoes slowly rolled as if they were dying, and finally drifted away and returned to the sky. Just as he was dealing with the last waterspout, Xueqi Jingqing tapped the ground with the tip of his foot, and a large pit was blasted out of the ground. His figure was like a long rainbow, piercing through the tornadoes, and then came to the front of Xueqi Pan, and pushed out with his palm. Xueqi Pan, who was not surprised, sneered, and changed his claw into a fist, and went straight for the center. Xueqi Jingqing turned his palm sideways, ignoring the turbulent fist force, and only placed it on the back of his fist. Xueqi Pan's face changed slightly, and he retracted his right fist, while his left hand stuck to the middle of the bridge of his hand, trying to remove this wrist. Unexpectedly, Xueqi Jingqing changed his grip in an instant, and pressed down diagonally, while his left hand fiercely slapped Xueqi Pan's shoulder. This attack seemed to be played down, but it disrupted the center of gravity of the ancestor whose inner strength had already reached the point of perfection. His body was thrown forward, but Xueqi Pan was adept at facing the enemy, and he borrowed the momentum to smash his shoulder against Mount Tai, and smash the chest of this eldest grandson of the first wife who had a strange technique. However, the expressionless Xueqi Jingqing changed his grip again, and pushed Xueqi Pan back to his original position. For a moment, the latter only had the rare bravery in the world, but he could not move, nor could he stay still. All of this happened in the blink of an eye, and both sides had switched from offense to defense. Xueqi Jingqing pushed out with his palm again, and Xueqi Pan accurately calculated the speed of his palm. He countered with an even fiercer elbow strike, but he did not expect that Xueqi Jingqing's palm strike, which was originally like a needle hidden in silk floss, would explode the moment it was about to touch Xueqi Pan's elbow strike, and his palm strike was even fiercer and faster than Xueqi Pan's elbow strike, and it landed on Xueqi Pan's chest. Ripples that could be seen with the naked eye appeared between the two of them because of this palm strike. Xueqi Pan's tall and sturdy body was pushed back 100 feet. The wind chimes that had been pulled taught all this while finally could not bear the burden and fell to the ground. Xueqi Pan, who was known for his bravery and fierceness in the world, was actually pushed back? Chapter 309. At this moment, an old man carrying a sword slowly walked onto the snowy plains. He wasn't the least bit surprised by this shocking scene. Lowering his head, he said in a clear voice, "Father, Xueqi Jingxian has been killed by Xueqi Jingqing." Xueqi Pan hummed indifferently. He looked thoughtfully at Xueqi Jingqing, who clearly wanted to commit treason to the end. He asked, "How many moves did it take to kill your third brother, who had just entered the profound finger realm?" Xueqi Jingqing, who had been expressionless all this time, suddenly smiled. He coughed a few times and covered his mouth. Smiling vaguely, he said, "We agreed beforehand that I would kill him with the profound finger realm. However, I actually used the heavenly phenomenon realm. That's why it was only one move." The ancient sword at Xueqi's waist wailed incessantly, his expression furious. Xueqi Pan nodded. "Your last palm strike just now was also the same. Everything before was merely a diversion." Xueqi Jingqing, whose face was as white as snow, said indifferently, "Insignificant skill. Of course, it can't slay the evil flood dragon. Dare I ask if old ancestor's hand is warm? If it is, Jingqing will no longer be polite." Xueqi, who was watching from the side, was stunned. Xueqi Pan let out a burst of joyful laughter that came from the bottom of his heart. Pointing at Xueqi Jingqing, he said, "You brat, arrogant to the point of being adorable. You are worthy of being the one I think most highly of in the entire Insignia Mountain. Truly a pity." Xueqi Jingqing covered his mouth and coughed a few times. Raising his head to look at the rolling black clouds, he softly said, "When I was young, I read that an ant trying to shake a large tree was laughable and overconfident. At the time, I only thought it was laughable. Later, after careful consideration, I thought that changing the word laughable to respectful was not bad. An ant trying to shake a large tree was laughable and overconfident?" Of the 3 generations of Insignia Mountain, Xueqi Jingxian was already a dead man, and Xueqi Jingqing was also about to die. Xueqi Jingqing retracted his gaze. With one hand behind his back and the other extended, he loudly said, "Xueqi Jingqing invites old ancestor to die." Xueqi was immediately frightened speechless. When had his sickly cat-like eldest son become a fierce tiger that could bite and fight with his father, Xueqi Pan? Insignia Mountain, which boasted of enjoying the blessings of the continent, was unable to escape the fate of 2 tigers. On the snowy plains of Mount, a storm. Over at the east sect, Shenyuan Jingyi was truly enraged. Especially after his niece, Shenyuan Qingfeng, had come to stir things up, adding fuel to the fire. Did that sloppy young heir really think that he had come to Mount Hui to enjoy the scenery? My Mount Hui and our neighbor, Mount Longhu, are mutually supporting each other. Even Prince Zhao Yi of Guangling, who is second to none in the southeast of the empire, dares to defy us. You, who has roots far away in Bailiang, and His Royal Highness, who has yet to inherit the throne, dares to behave atrociously here? It was true that he was wary of this Bailiang dragon, but he wasn't really afraid of him. The one that Shenyuan Jingyi didn't dare to use his full strength to crush wasn't Su Fengnian, who only had skin and a title. It wasn't even Li Chungang, who was still ranked 8th in the world. It was that crippled butcher. Shenyuan Jingyi cast a sidelong glance at Shenyuan Qingfeng and coldly snorted. This little bitch who lives off others while helping others. As expected of the daughter of that shameless woman. She wants to borrow power to reverse the decline of the first wife's branch. As a little bitch, she doesn't feel ashamed to show her face in public. First, it was that uncouth brat from the countryside, Yuan Tingshan. Then, she threw flirtatious glances at the influential Song family. Now, she's even seduced the heir of Bailiang, who has a terrible reputation. The Shenyuan family's reputation has been completely lost. Shenyuan Jingyi's expression turned warm. He turned his head and smiled at the guest that he relied on the most. I've troubled Brother Hong. Hong Yu indifferently replied. It's my duty. Huang Manor, who had smashed the guest's head with a single punch, had nothing better to do. From time to time, he would stretch out his leg and kick the headless corpse's hand. Everyone from Mount Hui felt their hair stand on end. The youth, who was born with unparalleled physical strength, grinned when he saw Hong Yu step out. At this moment, the head steward of the second branch hurriedly ran over. A guest that had been worshipped by the third branch had ill intentions and tripped him. The steward fell flat on his face. He didn't even care about glaring at the guest and only cared about getting up and rushing to his master, Shenyuan Jingyi's side. For some reason, this steward felt a chill run down his spine. His lips trembled as he stood on tiptoe and whispered in his ear, "Third master is dead." Shenyuan Jingyi thought he had misheard and frowned. "What did you say?" The steward's body trembled as he repeated in a trembling voice, "Third master, Shenyuan Jingxian is dead." Shenyuan Jingyi's eyes widened, but he immediately suppressed his shock and tried his best to remain calm. "How did he die?" The steward, who seemed to be trying to resist the chill of early autumn, covered his chest with his hands and lowered his head. "First Madam said that Shenyuan Jingqing killed him." Shenyuan Jingyi finally couldn't hold back his anger. "Bullshit," the steward said with a sullen face. "It's true. Third master's corpse is still lying in the courtyard. No one dares to touch it." Shenyuan Qingfeng, who was well aware of the situation, sneered. She had never felt so carefree and happy before. His Royal Highness, whose nature was to wish for the world to be in chaos, was moved when he saw this scene. Blue Bird was currently chasing after the man with the fan like a stray dog. Su Fengnian laughed loudly. "Blue Bird, come back, come back. This great bull gang's backyard is already on fire. Shenyuan Jingqing killed Shenyuan Jingxian. Brothers killing each other is lamentable and lamentable." The crowd was in an uproar. The guests weren't blind. Aside from a few martial fanatics who didn't know much about the world, most of them were shrewd people. When they connected the dots with Shenyuan Jingyi's abnormal behavior, they knew that the Bailiang heir's earth-shattering words weren't too far from the truth. Was the towering tree of Mount Hui going to fall? When the tree falls, the monkeys scatter. Those who ran too slowly would be crushed to death by the tree. Especially those who tied their lives to the tree branches with ropes. They were destined to die the most miserable deaths. But would it fall? Would Mount Hui really change? Almost everyone didn't believe it. Even if Shenyuan Jingqing really did kill Shenyuan Jingxian, as long as the Grand Ancestor was present, the situation wouldn't change. As for how Shenyuan Jingqing killed Grandmaster Shenyuan Jingxian, no one could figure it out no matter how hard they racked their brains. They might as well not think about it. Instead, they turned their attention to His Royal Highness, who had caused a huge commotion as soon as he came up the mountain. Some of the more quick-witted guests of the martial arts world were secretly considering whether or not they could latch onto Bailiang Palace. There were many secret manuals in Mount Hui, but could there be more than the Tide Hark Pavilion? Grand Ancestor Xuanyuan's martial arts were profound and boundless, but in the end, he couldn't jump out of Jianghu. No matter how big Jianghu was, it was nothing compared to the king of Bailiang, who had coldly looked down on Jianghu from horseback in the past. The situation suddenly went completely out of control. What's going on over at the snowy plains? Could it be a tornado created by human power? Good heavens, this is 3 dragons drinking water. Could it be that the Grand Ancestor has come out of seclusion? Is he going to ascend? Shenyuan Jingqing turned his head to look, his face dark and livid. Su Fengnian struck while the iron was hot and spouted nonsense. Hey, old man Xian named Yuan Jingjing, if you don't let this Xianxia pass, everyone will miss a good show that is hard to come by in 100 years. Shenyuan Qingfeng very tactfully added flowers to the brocade and calmly said, Uncle, His Highness came up the mountain at my father's invitation and has the Grand Ancestor's permission. Shenyuan Jingqing was hesitant. Dirty linen shouldn't be aired in public. If he let that jinx pass, he would lose face. But if he insisted on a deadlock and allowed the heir to slander him, the hearts of the people of Mount Hui would be shaken. Wait a minute. Shenyuan Jingqing's mind immediately turned. If what the steward said was true, then his third brother Shenyuan Jingxian was already dead. His eldest brother had gone to the snowy plains to seek his own death, and his father Shenyuan Guoqi had no intention of becoming the head of the family. In the future, when the Grand Ancestor ascended to immortality, who would be in charge of Mount Hui? It was truly a case of searching high and low for something, only to find it by chance. Shenyuan Jingqing was overjoyed, but he still looked like he was in a dilemma. Everyone held their breaths, patiently waiting for Shenyuan Jingqing's decision. Is it going to rain? Su Fengnian looked up at the sky, then turned to Shenyuan Jingqing with a smile. Let me pass, and an umbrella. That won't be difficult, right? Shenyuan Jingqing's face was angry, but he clearly took a step back. He calmly ordered the steward beside him, Go get an umbrella. Su Fengnian brought all of his men to the snowy plains, but Shenyuan Jingqing only brought his 2 trusted aides, Huang Fengfua and Huang Fengfua. Shenyuan Qingfeng brought up the rear. Some scenes that she thought she had long forgotten suddenly appeared vividly in her mind. That man who mocked himself for being tasteless if he didn't read for a day, had personally taught her how to read, saying that as long as she opened a book, it would be beneficial, but she didn't need to understand it. He taught her how to write, and said that at the beginning of the book, she could use clever phrases to attract people's attention, causing them to be amazed at first sight, but it didn't matter if she started strong but finished weak. He had once let his young self ride on his neck, saying with a smile that dogs don't bark well, and humans don't speak well. If she wanted to be a good person, she should learn from dogs. At that time, Shenyuan Qingfeng was still young and didn't understand anything. When she reached an age where she could understand, she only had prejudice and contempt for him because she was too stubborn. All these years, she only had disdain and ridicule for his poems and essays. If I don't open my mouth first when spring comes, which bug dares to make a sound? Easy to rise and easy to fall, easy to be left and right, easy to be a fence-sitter, easy to reverse, easy to overturn a petty person's heart. Eating tea and eating food is suffering, being able to eat is a blessing, eating more is beneficial. Now that she read and thought about it again, Shenyuan Qingfeng couldn't help but cry. The snowy plains were cloudy with wind and rain, with lightning flashing and thunder rumbling. The torrential rain poured down, splashing on the heads of the group. Mount Hui seemed to have run out of luck. Chapter 3:10. The group quickly walked towards the snowy plains. The closer they got, the more violent the wind and thunder became. It was as if 10,000 horses were galloping, causing a piercing pain in their eardrums. Bluebird held the kona in one hand and the umbrella in the other. Her expression was the same as usual. The old man wearing the sheepskin fur coat probably felt that this matter had nothing to do with him, so he walked rather lazily and leisurely, allowing the rain to fall on his body. With the old god of swords' vigorous internal energy, it wasn't difficult for him to keep the wind and rain away from him. However, for Li Chungang, this kind of gaudy expert demeanor wasn't something that could be faked. One umbrella couldn't block the wind and rain. The hem of Su Fengnian's brocade gown had long been soaked, and his boots were almost enough to raise a few small fish. He raised his hand into the rain and pushed the umbrella towards Bluebird. However, he hadn't taken more than a few steps when Bluebird quietly moved back. Half of her body was exposed to the rain. Su Fengnian was so angry that he laughed and took the umbrella. He hugged Blue Bird's slender shoulders and held the umbrella together. Shenyuan Qingfeng had been in a daze the entire way, swaying and falling. Her cultivation in martial arts had always been mediocre. The rain of soybeans slapped on her cold and elegant face, making her look extremely pitiful. Su Fengnian turned around and glanced at her. He didn't pity her at all. To be honest, he didn't have any irreconcilable enmity with this woman. It was just that he had bumped into a knife's edge when he was traveling back in the day and had a small grudge with her. In addition, the Shenyuan family was a big tree that attracted the wind. His Royal Highness couldn't get along with others, so he naturally wouldn't bicker with ordinary people. After a few rounds, he had picked Shenyuan Qingfeng and Hui Shan. Moreover, every time when Hua mentioned this daughter of a wealthy family, he would always gnash his teeth. As brothers forged in times of trouble, Su Fengnian had to vent his anger no matter what. He remembered that when Su Fengnian was playing wild chess to earn money, when Hua would pretend to be a chess player to win some copper coins, so as to lure the spectators into the trap. When Su Fengnian quarreled with others, he would say that a gentleman uses his mouth and not his fists. He would appear to be trying to mediate the fight, but he would shout with all his might to stop the fight, but in reality, he would kick those bastards who lost in chess but refused to pay up. Usually after a fight, the other party would inexplicably suffer countless monkey plucking peaches or black tiger digging out the heart. Their entire body would be covered with Wan Hua's footprints. When they finally came back to their senses, they were already lying on the ground without the strength to fight back. As for Wan Hua, he admired Su Fengnian from the bottom of his heart. He remembered that once at the Lantern Festival in Lu Province, the two fellows saw a young lady in front of them. Her waist was really thin, so thin that it made people worry that her waist would be broken if they twisted it. Su Fengnian made a bet with Wan Hua that he could hug Gu Liang's small waist without being hit. How could Wan Hua be willing to believe it? As a result, Su Fengnian indeed openly put his hand on that young lady's small waist and even intimately whispered something into her ear. After that, Wan Hua's eyeballs almost fell to the ground. That young lady first glared angrily at Su Fengnian, but after hearing what he said, her eyes instantly became as gentle as water. She only glared fiercely at Wan Hua, but she did not struggle free. Su Fengnian immediately let go of that seductive small waist and chatted and laughed with the young lady. His hand, however, made a kneading gesture on her small perky buttocks for Wan Hua to see. Until now, Wan Hua still did not know how Su Fengnian did it. In fact, it was very simple. Su Fengnian told that young lady that Wan Hua behind her was a perverted thief with bad intentions. He was protecting the flower. The pitiful Wan Hua had looked at every woman in the past with eyes full of lust. Let alone a perverted thief. Even if he was a great perverted thief who mercilessly destroyed a flower, the young lady still believed him without a doubt. Su Fengnian hugged Bluebird's damp shoulders tightly and said with a soft laugh, "You called me young master when a few times. Wan Hua will really remember you for many years." Bluebird gave a puzzled grunt. Su Fengnian turned his head and stared at her face that could be considered delicate, but he never got tired of looking at it. He smiled and said, "It's nothing. My mind accidentally went astray." Shenyuan Jingyi walked at the very front, the little abacus in his stomach crackling loudly and loudly. After his eldest brother had caused the death of Shenyuan Jingxian, who was at the Grandmaster realm, he still dared to come to Bull's Descent Snow Plateau. Even if he brought a bramble to ask for punishment, he still wouldn't be able to get anything out of it. The old ancestor's temperament was hard to predict, but there was no doubt that he liked to seek revenge for the smallest grievance and to weigh the benefits extremely well. His eldest brother, Shenyuan Jingqing, had obviously studied to the point that he had become a cripple. It was one thing for him to be content with his useless studies, but how could the old ancestor easily forgive him for using some unknown method to kill his third brother, whom he had placed such high hopes on? That niece of his who was fiercely siding with outsiders was acting abnormally. There was a suspicion that a broken jar would be smashed. In Mount Hui, how could a woman have the slightest chance to stand out? Grand Guest Elder Huang Fengfu's expression was calm, but Hong Piao, on the other hand, seemed to be distressed. Shenyuan Jingyi didn't pay attention to these minor details. Stepping onto the snow plateau, Shenyuan Jingyi immediately caught sight of the old ancestor's imposing figure. His qi leaked out violently like a tide, as if he was holding up a large umbrella, repelling the raindrops from 3 feet away from him. He then looked at his eldest brother, Shenyuan Jingqing, who was standing in the field like a drowned rat, covering his mouth and coughing. You Confucian scholars scrupulously abide by the words of the northern sage Zhang, who said that you should cultivate your body, govern the country, and bring peace to the world. But let me ask you, Shenyuan Jingqing, what kind of body do you cultivate? What kind of family do you govern? After living your whole life, you can't even protect your wife and daughter. Other people reincarnate to be free and unfettered. Haha, it's fine if you don't reincarnate. The wind whistled at the top of the mountain, but old ancestor Xuanyuan's arrogant laughter was even more ear-piercing. According to common sense, Shenyuan Jingqing was far from 50 years old. It was appropriate to say that he had lived half his life, but Shenyuan Great Plate said that he had lived his whole life. It was obvious that he had seen through Shenyuan Jingqing's method of fighting for the realm at the cost of his life. Moreover, the old ancestor didn't intend to let this scholarly and crafty junior continue to live. It was enough for Mount Hui to have one land immortal. What was the point of enjoying the land immortal alone? If there were two, what kind of scandal would it be? How could he enjoy the land immortal alone? If Shenyuan Jingqing was willing to practice martial arts according to his wishes, Shenyuan Great Plate wouldn't mind letting him take over Mount Hui after he ascended. But if Shenyuan Jingqing could compete for the land immortal in his lifetime, Shenyuan Great Plate would definitely strangle him. It would be best if I could ascend. If I worked hard for 100 years to seek immortality without any results, after I died, who would care about the rise and fall of the family? My children and grandchildren would have their own fortune. Whether it was glory or disgrace, I, Shenyuan Great Plate, wouldn't care about this damn thing. When Shenyuan Jingqing heard this, he finally ate a pill of reassurance. There was no deviation in the development of the situation. This time, the old ancestor wouldn't tolerate his big brother's misdeeds. He was curious about how his big brother could kill Shenyuan Jingxian, who had already entered the finger-profound realm. Shenyuan Jingqing believed that he had the right time, place, and people to sit in charge of Mount Hui, but he still couldn't do it. Shenyuan Jingqing inadvertently saw his father's expression and was shocked. Why was his father so serious? Then Shenyuan Jingqing said something that made Shenyuan Jingqing sluggish. Heaven's evil can be forgiven, but the evil you bring upon yourself is the hardest to bear. Today, Shenyuan Jingqing was only enforcing justice on behalf of the heavens and sweeping away the 500 years of accumulated dust of Mount Hui. As for how much can be swept away, that would depend on the will of the heavens. In half a cup of tea's time, you exchanged 216 moves with the old ancestor as a heavenly image cultivator. Does the old ancestor have any chance of winning? Why use words to boost your courage? Shenyuan Great Plate, who had already accumulated power in Mount Hui for 60 years, was very calm. He said tit for tat, "You did your best without regard for your life, but did you ever hurt me?" Shenyuan Jingqing, who was dressed as a middle-aged scholar, smiled faintly. The old ancestor walked on the martial path for nearly 100 years. To Mount Hui, even if there was no merit, there was still hard work. If Shenyuan Jingqing won easily after 20 years of observation, the old ancestor would die unwillingly. Shenyuan Jingqing only felt that this big brother of his had lost his mind. But very quickly, Shenyuan Jingqing felt a monstrous chill fill his bones. Exchanged 200 moves with the old ancestor? Shenyuan Jingqing suddenly turned his head and said, "Third brother respected Shenyuan Jingqing because of charm. Second brother respected you because of slyness. Both are not righteous. The sins of the heavens can be forgiven, but the sins of one's own making are the hardest to bear." Shenyuan Great Plate said with a ferocious expression, "I want to see what other tricks you can play." Shenyuan Jingqing said calmly, "Jingqing has been observing for 20 years. I hope that today will be the day when I have accumulated enough. I definitely won't disappoint the old ancestor. Since everyone is here, Jingqing will go first. If the old ancestor still wants to hide and suppress your cultivation at medium heavenly image, be careful that you won't have the chance to reach great heavenly image." Shenyuan Great Plate sneered. "Oh? You caused such a big commotion, and even that woman with broken shoes didn't come to watch. You can't wait to go to the Yellow Springs Road? Could it be that you can't hold on until then? Your method is mysterious, but it's much more unorthodox than mine." Without waiting for the old ancestor to finish speaking, Shenyuan Jingqing rudely stopped listening. Instead, he turned his head and looked at his daughter from afar. This scholar had an open-minded smile on his face. Cultivating one's body was the correct heart. Scholar Mo Dao didn't have the courage to ask the heavens and earth to sink into the sea. Successful people didn't only have extraordinary talents, they also had to have a tenacious will. Shenyuan Qingfeng's mind flashed by, and those poems and essays appeared one by one. I've become a land immortal. Shenyuan Jingqing closed his eyes. He was bleeding from his 7 orifices, but his expression was calm as he spread out his hands. It was as if he wanted to encompass the entire world. With him as the center, the accumulated water on the snowy plains exploded outwards. In that instant, 9 bolts of lightning came from the heavenly court. Li Chungang, who had been silent all this time, sighed. How is this kid a Confucian scholar? He's clearly a Confucian saint. Chapter 3:11. The heavenly thunder was as thick as a tree. In the blink of an eye, it was projected onto the great snow plateau, exploding 9 large holes. Fortunately, the spectators were all safe and sound. The great snow plateau was divided into 2 parts by the Confucian scholar Shenyuan Jingqing. The 9 purple serpent-like thunder and lightning struck the great ancestor Xuanyuan's side. The old man was so arrogant that he didn't even try to dodge. His fist, which was as big as a bowl, smashed towards one of the purple thunder pillars. Upon contact, the earth trembled and the mountains shook. The great ancestor Huishan stood firm, but one of his sleeves was burned to ashes. The remaining purple thunder and lightning flickered, making him look like a divine general of thunder. Shenyuan Guoqi's strength was outstanding and his realm was profound. He had already understood the mandate of heaven, but after seeing this scene, his heart was still in turmoil. In Mount Hui, only he was qualified to say a few words to the cold-hearted Great Snow Plateau. However, he was still far from being on equal footing. Even if Shenyuan Guoqi was a great grandmaster of swordsmanship, he still had to be submissive and respectful in front of the Great Snow Plateau. Before the destruction of the Forbidden Villa, Huishan Shenyuan was known as the North Gashu and the South Shenyuan. His martial arts foundation was very long, and he learned a lot from many people. Other than a few exquisite and unique mental cultivation methods, the elders mostly taught the younger generation according to their aptitude. Shenyuan Guoqi was known as having an innate sword embryo since he was young, so he started to practice swordsmanship early. Now, there were 3 people in the current generation with the surname Jing. According to the custom, when they were 1 year old, they had to grab a book. The 3 people were different. Shenyuan Jingqing grabbed a book called the Spring and Autumn Annals, while Shenyuan Jingxian and Shenyuan Jingxian grabbed 2 martial arts secret manuals. In the next generation, because there were many children, it became more and more complicated. Shenyuan Qingfeng grabbed a jade rui, while Shenyuan Jinggong's eldest son, Shenyuan Qingmong, picked a string of bells. There were all kinds of strange things. Su Fengnian was about to ask when the old god of swords tilted his head and scratched his ear. It seemed that he did not feel any sense of accomplishment because he could not dig out the earwax. He said in a bad mood, "Open your eyes and watch carefully. The next 2 people are competing with something that can't be bought with money. Their moves may be ordinary, but after returning to the basics, it is nothing more than simplification. However, the flow of qi and timing are the key. For swordsmen like us, in the end, the sword is nothing more than a horizontal, vertical, and diagonal slash. Why is it that ordinary people use swords so inflexible, but brilliant swordsmen can generate upstanding qi? Sword immortals can fly and cut off heads? Once the sword is thrust, unless it is done with all its might and is as fast as it can be. Otherwise, once the qi circulates, although it seems fast, it will suddenly slow down, causing the opponent's expected counterattack to miss. When he changes, he will suddenly increase his speed. If he changes again, even if he can make it in time, he will lose his initial momentum. This is the most common and simple principle. When experts exchange blows, fighting strength is the foundation. Among them, a battle of wits, courage, and ruthlessness is the most exciting part. I remember that when the #1 expert of the Beimang went to the 2 Zen temples, he was stopped by the white-robed monk. The 2 of them did not seem to have truly exchanged blows. They did not make a single move and just stood there motionless. One of them was a martial sage, and the other could have been the reincarnation of the Bodhisattva of Buddhism. They could not be dozing off in a daze, right? But why didn't the son of the Beimang, who had reached the pinnacle of martial arts, make a move? This is the true beauty of the Vajra realm. The so-called first-grade Vajra realm experts of today's world are far inferior. Isn't the dead Shenyuan Jingxian known as the Vajra invincible finger? Invincible Vajra my ass. Shenyuan Jingqing abruptly used his qi to forcefully soar into the sky. After the 9 thunderbolts, there were bursts of heavenly thunder. In an instant, a strange phenomenon appeared. The water met the purple thunder. Li Chungang narrowed his eyes and said, "Little Su, if you don't want your retainers to be implicated and end up dying an unnatural death, then hurry up and get them to retreat. This old man only promised to protect your life. As for the others, the heavenly thunder is rolling down in a chaotic manner. This old man does not have the patience to block the natural disaster for them." Su Fengnian waved his hand, indicating that everyone except for Huang Manor and Blue Bird should retreat from the Great Snow Plateau. Shenyuan Jingqing and the 2 esteemed guests were shaken. Even though they were used to big scenes, at this moment, their faces were extremely pale. Especially Shenyuan Jingqing, who felt guilty in his heart. He was simply overwhelmed. Big Brother's words of, "I will become an earthly immortal," were more than 1,000 words of warning and threat. Earthly immortal realm? In the 100 years of the pugilistic world, other than Qi Xuanzhen of Mount Longhu, who was publicly recognized as a heavenly talent in his youth, even Wang Xianji, who occupied the 2nd place in the world for 60 years in Martial Emperor City, only dared to guess if she had such a divine ability. It could be seen how rare this earthly immortal realm was. The most mysterious thing was that this earthly immortal realm was far from what other first stage 3 realms could guess. In the past 500 years, there were some heaven-defying geniuses who had once reached the peak. However, they usually could not last long. It was like a swan stepping on snow and mud. They would occasionally leave a claw on the mud and quickly return to heavenly phenomenon. There were very few who directly ascended like Qi Xuanzhen. This was also why Qi Xuanzhen was regarded as the only immortal who could rival ancestor Lu in the past 500 years. On the plateau, Shenyuan Jingqing once again surprised everyone. He gave up what was close at hand and went for what was far away. He fought with old ancestor Shenyuan in close combat. Shenyuan Jingqing and Shenyuan Pan rushed forward together. The latter's figure was in a straight line, and the wind and rain were swept away. He leaped up and hit Shenyuan Jingqing with his knee. Shenyuan Jingqing pressed his hands on old ancestor's knee and slid back, causing countless splashes. This Confucian scholar who had already transcended mortality did not want to dissipate this tyrannical force. Instead, he pushed to the side. Shenyuan Pan's burly body was still in the air. Shenyuan Jingqing leaned forward and smashed down with his elbow, smashing old ancestor's body onto the plateau. This was not enough. He kicked out and sent Shenyuan Pan flying more than 100 feet away. Shenyuan Jingqing took advantage of the situation and chased after him. Shenyuan Pan was kicked away. His 5 fingers dug into the ground and suppressed the momentum of his defeat. He clapped his palms and finally got up. When Shenyuan Jingqing closed in, he punched out with both fists. Shenyuan Jingqing, with an indifferent expression, met his opponent's fists with both hands and held them firmly. His figure stood tall and did not fall. A large space behind him had already been compressed by the enormous qi dynamic, causing the wind and rain to evaporate in an instant. Shenyuan Jingqing raised his hand and said softly, "Send old ancestor to heaven." Shenyuan Pan's body soared into the sky. Heavenly lightning struck down from the sky. A loud boom. Shenyuan Jingqing, who was standing on the ground, did not show any mercy after gaining the upper hand. He clapped his palms together in front of him. The accumulated water at the edge of the plateau that was originally flowing down the mountain surged up like 2 green dragons. The 2 dragons pierced through the sky of the plateau. Shenyuan Pan, who was in the air in a hurry to operate his sea of qi to resist the heavenly lightning, was blasted until he no longer had the strength to move. Shenyuan Jingqing tapped his toes and his figure soared into the air. He grabbed old ancestor Xuanyuan's belt and landed on the ground. He ran quickly. After running for 200 feet, his legs suddenly stopped. He threw Shenyuan Pan straight to the west, as if he wanted to throw this old ancestor Huishan off the plateau. Send him to heaven in one go? When Shenyuan Pan's body was about to fly out of the cliff of the plateau, he unexpectedly fell and landed on the edge of the cliff. Finally, the rainwater could not wash away the bloodstains on his face. He no longer had the calm and composed demeanor of a great master. Chapter 3:12. The old man was enduring, waiting for the eldest grandson of the first wife to exhaust his life to enter the realm of immortals from the side door. Shenyuan de Pan's celestial state was achieved step by step. As long as his meridians were not depleted, his sea of qi would not be exhausted. However, Shenyuan Jingqing, who was determined to destroy his sect, was different. Taking a shortcut was like building a pavilion in the sky. No matter how majestic it looked when it was built, there would be a moment when it would collapse. Xuan Pan took a deep breath. His chest and abdomen were burning with pain. It had been many years since he had encountered such a terrifying injury to his heart. It had been so long that he had almost forgotten about this pain. The last time was when he competed with Qi Xuanzhen on the demon-slaying platform. As for Gu Jiantang and the others, their so-called loss was only in a move or two. Since they did not fight to the death, Xuan Pan's loss was not considered tragic. Xuan Pan was about to take the time to adjust his breath when Xuan Jingqing leisurely appeared in front of him. He heard the grandson of the Confucian sage say softly, "Although it is difficult to climb, it can reach Kunlun. Falling from evil is useless in Kunlun. Old ancestor, you should read those books that you think are useless. Martial arts can be cultivated from secret manuals. To reach the celestial state, it is not something that can be accumulated from hundreds or thousands of martial arts secret manuals." Xuan Pan said ferociously, "You think you are worthy to talk to me about principles?" Blood no longer seeped out of Xuan Jingcheng's 7 orifices. Instead it flowed out. It was no longer scarlet, but a shocking black. However, this Confucian scholar's expression was still calm. Xuan Pan swept out with his foot, and he stepped on Ancestor Huishan's knee, causing him to fall to the ground pathetically, crashing into the rain. Xuan Jingqing smiled and said, "Xuan Jingqing is talking to you. Old ancestor, you can naturally ignore it. But now that an immortal is talking to you, why are you still so arrogant and ignorant?" A thick bolt of lightning struck where Xuan Pan landed. Fortunately, the latter sensed it and rolled without caring about his identity, barely escaping the disaster. Xuan Jingqing was dumbfounded and his lips trembled. The ancient sword at Xuan Guoqi's waist did not dare to make any sound, fearing that it would cause an unpredictable disaster. Pull one hair and the whole body will be affected. Heaven's secrets. The more powerful a person was, the more they could manipulate heaven and earth. Xuan Guoqi was well aware that on the snowfield of Mount Hui, he was the one who was most likely to be affected by the aftermath of the catastrophe. Xuan Jingqing coughed a few times. It was supposed to be very light, but it sounded exceptionally sharp in the ears of the experts present. Xuan Dandan was overjoyed. His figure flashed straight away, no longer wanting to fight to the death. He only wanted to increase the distance between him and Xuan Jingqing. The farther the better. How could something like face compare to the most important thing, life? Xuan Jingqing did not chase after him. He looked at the entrance of the great snow field and did not see that familiar figure. His eyes dimmed slightly. He covered his mouth and turned to look at Xuan Ancestor. He asked indifferently, "Do you have any last words for the descendants of Mount Hui?" Xuan Pan pretended to be deep in thought to stall for time. To be honest, Su Fengnian admired Xuan Dandan's shamelessness. As the high and mighty ancestor of Mount Hui, he was also one of the top few figures in the entire Jianghu. However, he kidnapped people for dual cultivation and took people's wives and daughters. When he was at a disadvantage, he did not care about his status at all. Needless to say, his martial arts skills were even more impressive. Just as His Royal Highness's imagination was running wild, the middle-aged scholar called Confucian sage by the old god of swords suddenly looked over. Su Fengnian's body suddenly froze. However, for some reason, the old man wearing the sheepskin fur coat ignored him. Instead, he just stared blankly at the demon-slaying platform on Mount Longhu, leaving behind a not-so-tall figure. Xuan Jingqing looked at His Royal Highness. He coughed and said intermittently, "After dealing with the family matters, Xuan Jingqing will talk to Qing Feng about his martial arts experience. In the future, she will pass it on to you as a reward for His Royal Highness taking the risk to come up the mountain today. It's a pity that I won't have the chance to invite your Highness to drink a pot of osmanthus wine. Qingfeng's method of warming wine is excellent." Xuan Jingqing looked at Su Longxiang again. There was admiration in his eyes. What a good saying. Li Bai won't be lonely anymore from the 2 Zen temples. Here, Xuan Jingqing will say one more thing. Little prince, you shouldn't enter the celestial phenomenon state so easily. After entering the celestial phenomenon state, you will be invincible. You have to know that once you enter the celestial phenomenon state, you will have to resonate with heaven and earth. An ordinary man with a jade ring will only be attacked by thieves. Su Fengnian said respectfully, Su Fengnian thanks Mr. for the guidance. Shenyuan Jingqing nodded and then said to Shenyuan Guoqi. However, he didn't turn his head to look at him. He said indifferently and calmly, "Father, please leave the mountain. You can never enter the mountain again in this life." Shenyuan Guoqi was so angry that he laughed. "You." At this moment, Shenyuan Jingqing was killed on the spot by the two guests behind him. Shenyuan Guoqi was stunned. Huang Fengfua had a good relationship with his son. Everyone in Mount Hui knew that they had a good relationship. But when did Hong Yu get to know Shenyuan Jingqing? Shenyuan Jingqing coughed violently. Hong Yu's martial arts cultivation today was all because of me. Shenyuan Jingqing isn't a bookworm. He wouldn't have just studied there for 20 years. Shenyuan Guoqi's heart was dead. Shenyuan Jingqing waved his hand at the two guests. "Send him down the mountain." Shenyuan Guoqi was furious. He gritted his teeth and sneered. "With just them?" Shenyuan Jingqing smiled faintly. "I knew it would be like this." Shenyuan Jingqing lowered his head and looked at his chest that was dyed red and black by blood. Dark clouds covered the sky above the snowfield. A huge and strange vortex appeared and covered the entire Mount Zhaoyao. This strange phenomenon was only a hair's breadth away from Qi Xuanzhen's ascension. Shenyuan Jingqing slowly knelt down and said loudly, "The heavens carry thousands of phenomena, the earth carries all living things, the heavens and earth empress." Shenyuan Jingqing kneels to the heavens and earth, begging for death. Shenyuan Jingqing begs for death. Shenyuan Jingqing's voice echoed. Not to mention Mount Huanyo and Mount Huanyo. Even the nearly 10,000 Taoists of Mount Longhu could hear it clearly. The heavens and earth moved. Shenyuan Guoqi's expression was almost desperate. He unsheathed his simple ancient sword and flew out of the snowfield cliff, his figure flitting away in a panic. At the same time, something poured down. It was a bolt of purple lightning. It was as thick as a mountain peak. Apart from Shenyuan Qingfeng's small piece of land, it was as if no matter how turbulent the world was, Shenyuan Jingqing, as a father, would protect a quiet and stable place before his death. The old god of swords brought Su Fengnian, Su Longxiang, and Blue Bird, who were holding umbrellas, and floated out of the snowfield. Shenyuan Pan wanted to jump off the snowfield, but was forcibly pulled back into the purple lightning pillar. Heavenly tribulation. It flashed and disappeared. On the vast snowfield, there was no sound of thunder, only wind and rain. In the end, only Shenyuan Qingfeng was left. He truly stood alone. Shenyuan Jingqing and Shenyuan Pan perished together. Not even their corpses were left. Not even ashes were left. After Shenyuan Qingfeng recovered from his daze, he let out a heart-wrenching, hoarse cry and collapsed in the rain. Su Fengnian slowly walked back to the snowfield, all sorts of feelings welling up in his heart. He saw Shenyuan Qingfeng curled up there and sobbing. Su Fengnian sighed and walked over to hold the umbrella for her. It wasn't for her, but because of what Shenyuan Jingqing had done, Su Fengnian deserved to do this for the daughter of the Confucian sage. The rain was still pouring heavily. She didn't get up, so Su Fengnian held the umbrella the whole time. The old god of swords, Li Chungang, stared at this scene with wide eyes. Then, his eyes dimmed with loneliness, reminiscence, and reminiscence. That year when he carried that girl up the evil-slaying platform, it was also raining heavily, and he also held the umbrella. The world didn't know that this god of swords had been wronged by Qi Xianzhu. It didn't matter that the wooden horse and ox were broken, nor did it matter that he was left with only one arm. These weren't the reasons for Li Chuangong's great drop in cultivation. Even after being trapped under the Tide Listening Pavilion for 20 years, Li Chungang still couldn't walk out of his own prison. She was already invincible in the world. So what about herself? Li Chungang remembered her face when she died. At that time, she couldn't say a single word. But now that he thought about it, wasn't it just no regrets? Li Chungang walked to the edge of the snowfield. Behind him was a man and a woman holding an umbrella, just like the scene between him and the green-robed girl. When her chest was pierced by a sword, she said with a pale smile, "If the heavens didn't give birth to you, Li Chungang, it would be boring." Li Chungang shouted, "Swords come!" All the swordsmen of Mount Insignia unsheathed their swords and flew toward the snowfield. The Taoists of Mount Longhu unsheathed their thousands of peachwood swords and flew toward Bull Mound. 2 waves of flying swords. They blotted out the sun. On this day, God of Swords, Li Chungang once again entered the realm of a land sword immortal. Chapter 313. Su Fengnian used to be a pauper when he was practicing the knife. He ate and drank in the Golden Imperial Palace every day and even complained about being poor. He used the knife to move books as if he was moving mountains. Finally, his horizons were broadened. Although he heard from the white-haired old man that the flying sword beheading the head was a celestial supernatural power, he only treated it as a legend. How could he expect to witness it with his own eyes? At this moment, His Royal Highness raised his head to look at the two groups of flying swords that filled the sky. Staring at this scene, his scalp exploded and his blood vessels expanded. He was dumbfounded and muttered to himself, "Oh my God, I can't reward this technical work." The two guests who were lucky enough to escape looked at each other in shock. Shenyuan Jingqing, who entered the realm of Confucian Saint through a side door, had just been annihilated. How could there be another celestial sword? The old man who wore a tattered sheepskin coat and liked to pick his earwax was indeed the #1 swordsman in the past, Li Chungang. However, after Deng Tea appeared in the world and roamed the pugilistic world, he would occasionally make a move with the imposing manner of a half-demon, half-immortal. Who would doubt that the old god of swords would be no match for the new god of swords? But the scene in front of them, forget about the hundreds of swords from Mount Huishan flying over. However, the thousands of peach wood swords from Mount Longhu were a few miles away from the Bulgang. Not to mention the swords of the Taoist priests in the remote Taoist temples. How could they be summoned to the great snow field by the old man's words? Didn't they say that Li Chuangong's realm dropped greatly after his arm and sword was broken? Huang Fengfua and Hong Yuang did not think highly of him even if he fought with Shenyuan Pan, let alone Wang Shenji. However, the old man who had retired from the Jianghu for 20 years had reached the realm of prophecy. How could he be so mysterious? There was a secret in the Jianghu. The Confucian saint of the three sects had a vast aura that connected heaven and earth. Therefore, his words contained the heavenly law. Just now, when Shenyuan Jingqing knelt to the Queen of Earth and said the words, "seeking death," it attracted the heavenly thunder that was as thick as a mountain range. The great immortal Zhenren of Taoism could make prophecies come true. Therefore, he could use the curse to kill demons and enforce justice on behalf of the heavens. Many bodhisattvas of Buddhism had great wishes and their words could shake the 3,000 worlds. Li Chuangong's means were naturally not far off. As expected of a sword immortal. Su Fengnian, who was still holding the umbrella for Shenyuan Qingfeng, muttered to himself, "This sword descends from the heavens is very domineering. If it can even kill dragons and tigers, then it'll really be awesome. Let's see if those old Taoists still dare to be cocky." The old god of swords, who was facing the demon-slaying platform with his back facing the Crown Prince Palace, seemed to have heard Su Fengnian's nagging. His qi that was soaring into the clouds suddenly condensed, and more than 1,300 flying swords instantly fell into the cliff. He turned his head and said unhappily, "You're the only one who likes to show off. You should know that there is always someone better than you." And mountain sect. The mountains north. And this old man has long passed the age of being ruthless. Now he wants to take little Jiang as his disciple. Sigh. It's a pity I didn't see her. Otherwise, I would have a higher chance of taking her as my disciple. Su Fengnian wanted to tease the old god of swords for being useless. But he did not have the guts to do so. Su Fengnian heard about the Taoist head for the first time. He asked, "What's the Taoist head?" Li Chungang walked towards Bull Mansion and scratched his crotch. The rain was sticky and uncomfortable. He said, "The Taoist chief is the founder of Taoism and has the same status as the leader of Buddhism. It's just that this position is too hot. Those who are qualified to sit on this position have good temperament and are not willing to stand out. Those who want to be the Taoist chief are just small fries fishing for fame and compliments. Most of them are too close to the imperial court and don't have enough popularity. Therefore, in the past 100 years, except for Qi Xianzhu who deserves to be the Taoist chief, the rest of them can't be convinced by the public. As for the Buddhist sect, the white-robed monk Li Shaoxin who traveled thousands of miles to the west to seek scriptures once had the chance to be the bodhisattva. Unfortunately, I heard that he went to get married and have a daughter. Therefore, the Taoist head and the Buddha head are empty. The reason I'm telling you this now is because this old man sensed a few peaks in Mount Longhu when he was riding his sword on the snowy plains. The Taoist from the Taoist mansion stopped him and the Taoist from Zhenjuan Temple also interfered. This is not strange. What's strange is that the qi in Mount Yunjin was so abundant that it could be called fate, but it was not willing to do anything. Su Fengnian, who had been holding the umbrella to shelter Shenyuan Qingfeng from the wind and rain, gripped the handle tightly and said, "It must be that weird Taoist called Zhao Huangchao. He claimed to be a member of the Liang imperial family, who entered Mount Longhu to cultivate Taoism. When I was at the sword cliff of Mount Quanglu, he performed an out-of-body act and came here on a dragon. He looked to be in his 30s or 40s. God knows if he has lived for 2 or 3 decades. This Taoist kept saying that he was enforcing justice on behalf of heaven. What a bold attitude." Su Fengnian would not elaborate on many details. After all, the battle between the dragon and the python was too obscure and mysterious. Besides, Shenyuan Qingfeng, an outsider, was present. Shenyuan Qingfeng, whose skirt was soaked in water under the umbrella, slowly came back to her senses. Her eyes were cold and emotionless. "Some time ago, I went to Mount Yunjin to look for a flood salamander. I saw a middle-aged Taoist fishing in a deep lake. At that time, I thought his cultivation was mediocre and that he was pretending to be a hermit expert. At that time, this Taoist was discussing the scriptures of the 3 sects with Song Kelly, the heir of the Song family. He was very arrogant and called Saint Zhang of the North as Teacher Zhang. It was as if he was born 2,000 years earlier and dared to sit and discuss Taoism with the saint." Li Chungang frowned. Zhao Huangchao of the 3 sects? This old man had never heard of him. Qi Xuanzhen also did not mention him in the 2 times he met him. However, with this Taoist's cultivation, he was more than qualified to be the leader of the Taoists. "Young Su, how did you offend this celestial? How could you make him go astray and not hesitate to show off his dragon ride?" With this Taoist strength, he was able to live in seclusion in Mount Longhu for at least 100 years without making a name for himself. He was clearly not the kind of person who liked fame. His surname was Zhao and he was from the Son of Heaven. This old man understood. He was just concerned about the gathering and dispersing of the world's fate. Based on this, you should be grateful that Chao Chongqing took Zhang Girl away early. Otherwise, if Zhao Huangchao saw you and saw through the mystery, you would be in serious trouble. At Mount Quanglu, with this old man's ability at that time, it would be useless even if he opened the gate of heaven. Su Fengnian smiled mischievously. "So now." Chapter 3:14. The old man scolded. "Does this old man have nothing better to do than to stand up for you? Do you think fighting with celestial beings is a small matter? Celestial beings, dragon spirit travel, profound fate." Shenyuan Qingfeng felt a chill run down her spine. She used to be an arrogant and stubborn woman born in the most powerful family in the martial arts world, the only daughter of the first wife, and had a photographic memory. She could be counted as a small arsenal. Only the son of a top scholarly family like Song Kelly, who had real talent, could slightly subdue her. However, ever since this umbrella holder entered Jianzhou, her entire life had been turned upside down. Her father had died just after showing off his celestial being style. The 3 people of the generation with the surname Jing, who were supposed to support Mount Hui's prestige for the next 50 years, were all dead. Shenyuan Dandan, who used to be a pillar of the sea, was killed. Her grandfather, Shenyuan Guoqi, was forced to jump off a mountain, and 2 guests turned against her on the snowy plains. If her father was here, they could still behave. But now there was not even half a grandmaster left in Mount Hui. How could she control those guests of sacrifice who looked like monkeys when the tree did not fall, and who looked like wolves when the tree fell? Su Fengnian saw that this woman had no intention of getting up. Was she addicted to sitting on the ground? Shenyuan Qingfeng, you can't always make me hold the umbrella. Now that the bull gang is without a leader, it's the best time for you to show your ambition. Don't waste it. Shenyuan Qingfeng was speechless. Shenyuan Qingfeng struggled to get up. Perhaps because he had been sitting for too long, his legs were sore, and he was about to fall back into the water. Su Fengnian tried to support him out of goodwill, but Shenyuan Qingfeng used all of her strength to push him away. She sneered, "Is it my ambition, or does your highness want to control Mount Huishan Shenyuan?" Su Fengnian sneered and said shamelessly, "Let's not beat around the bush. I like it. Since you're the one who started the conversation, why don't we have a good plan?" Shenyuan Qingfeng refused to back down. "Please speak," he said. The old god of swords ignored the scheming between the man and woman and walked straight to Bull Descending Manor. He walked up the steps and bent down to pick up the string of wind chimes. Su Fengnian spoke in a methodical manner. You're just worried that this Xianxia will take over the magpie's nest and use you as a puppet. You'll only stop when I've emptied Mount Hui's hundreds of years of wealth, right? Shenyuan Qingfeng said without hesitation. That's right. Your Highness has a good family background and high standards. I believe your appetite will not be small. Su Fengnian laughed and said, Shenyuan Qingfeng, oh Shenyuan Qingfeng, I don't mind telling you this. As long as you take the copies of those secret manuals into the Tide Listening Pavilion in Bailiang, I don't want anything else. Since we're doing business on the surface and I've accepted your benefits, I'll naturally help you secure your position as the head of Mount Hui. If anyone isn't convinced, you can let them have a taste of Bailiang's blade. Besides, the old god of swords is already a swordsman of the present era. It doesn't matter if you're a fox exploiting the tiger's might or taking advantage of others. Who would dare say no? Even if you don't want to stay in Mount Hui, no one will come into direct conflict with you. This is a business. Whether you're comfortable as the head of Mount Hui or not will depend on your own methods. When the time comes, if you need me to take action, you'll have to give me other benefits. When doing business, even blood brothers have to settle accounts clearly. What's more, we're enemies, aren't we? Shenyuan Qingfeng said coldly. Your Highness also said that we're enemies. Then what business are we doing? If worse comes to worst, Shenyuan Qingfeng will just go all out and leave this mess to my brothers. What's wrong with me leaving the mountain? Su Fengnian clicked his tongue and said, That's no fun. Your father, Shenyuan Jingqing, risked his life to create this situation. With your stubborn personality, how can you let it go? Who are you trying to fool? I'm not in the mood to beat around the bush with you. To put it bluntly, Mount Hui is in turmoil right now. If it weren't for the fact that I admire your father's actions, I wouldn't be so polite with a petty woman like you. Why would I stand here and hold an umbrella for you? Apart from your good skills in a fit of pique, what other skills do you have to show me? If you really piss me off, how hard would it be to support a puppet who's willing to be a lackey? Bailiang's hat of His Royal Highness isn't small, is it? Coincidentally, the few people that can't be suppressed by this hat are all dead. Su Fengnian observed Shenyuan Qingfeng's expression and said patiently, The bull gang can't beat the Dao Court's Mount Longhu in the first place. Now that you don't have me to back you up, won't you be suppressed for a few decades until you can't breathe? Besides, I'm Bailiang in the end. Aren't I going to leave soon? Once I leave, what are you worried about? If that's the case, then you're too useless. To tell the truth, the reason why I'm willing to let bygones be bygones and help you get promoted is because of that wooden sword Wenhua. He said that he'll use his sword to slap your little buttocks red when he learns superior swordsmanship. But once you leave the family, Wenhua won't go so far as to make things difficult for an ordinary woman with a miserable background. This prince won't be able to watch a good show. How boring. Shenyuan Qingfeng walked out of the umbrella and ignored Wenhua's teasing. He only asked, Miserable? Su Fengnian asked back, What do you think? Shenyuan Qingfeng asked, Are you pitying me? Su Fengnian didn't answer and only handed the umbrella to her. Seeing that she didn't move, he simply placed the umbrella on her shoulder and looked up at the dusky rain. If Wenhua were here, he'd definitely say that the heavens are pissing again. How naughty! Shenyuan Qingfeng was stunned. At this time, Hongyu took a few steps forward and got down on one knee. Young miss, from today onwards, Hongyu is at your beck and call. Huang Fengfua said with a smile, I only want to continue studying at Mount Insignia and hope to reach Brother Jingqing's level one day. Whoever makes an enemy of young miss is also an enemy of mine. Shenyuan Qingfeng was stunned and didn't say anything. A loud voice came from the celestial master residence of Mount Longhu. Since Sword Godly has borrowed a sword and left, do you dare return it? Li Chungang, who was sizing up Fengling, couldn't be bothered to respond. Next, Shenyuan Qingfeng inadvertently saw His Royal Highness winking at the old sword god and mouthing two words. After seeing this, Li Chungang rolled his eyes and blurted out an extremely vulgar word in the direction of Mount Longhu. Bullshit. If that was all, Shenyuan Qingfeng wouldn't have done anything. What the old man who had become a terrestrial sword immortal said next was truly domineering. That's what Su Fengnian said. Shenyuan Qingfeng immediately smiled through his tears. Chapter 3:15. If Li Chungang said, fart to the Taoist master's residence, outsiders would only say that the old god of swords' heroic spirit was still the same as before, especially after entering the threshold of Earth Immortal. They were full of confidence and could regard Li Chungang as an immortal swordsman. However, if it was Su Fengmian who said it, it would be a different story. Two great masters were fighting each other in the Great Snow Plains and the Taoist ancestral court, Longhu Mountain. Even if it was just a battle of words, it was still full of elegance. What was His Royal Highness doing? Su Fengmian could already imagine that for a long time, the whole Jianghu would become a big joke. Shenyuan Qingfeng, who was at a disadvantage in the scheming against His Royal Highness, could not help but gloat. She finally had some spirit and was no longer lifeless and haggard. Su Fengmian glared at her and took the lead to walk to the Great Snow Plains. Su Longxiang and Blue Bird followed closely behind. Shenyuan Qingfeng hesitated for a moment, then walked slowly in the rain with Huang Fengfua and Hong Yuang. Hong Yuang was expressionless. Huang Fengfua thought a lot in this short section of the road in the rain. Out of the corner of his eye, he glanced at the second foreign minister. Hong Yuang had always had a good reputation for his conduct and conduct. Not just anyone could claim the title of ancient style. Hong Yuang, as a foreign minister of Mount Huishan who came from a poor background, was not humble in front of others. This caused Shenyuan Qingfeng to treat him with respect. In private, Hong Yuang was called training a hawk instead of raising a dog. Hong Yuang was also not overbearing and never showed any complacency. However, no matter how Shenyuan Jingqing secretly supported and cultivated Hong Yu these years, it was still Shenyuan Jingqing who brought him to the mountain. This time, Hong Yu betrayed him on the Great Snow Plains and killed his benefactor Shenyuan Jingqing together. Huang Fengfua was shocked at that time. If this matter spread out, it would almost destroy Hong Yu's reputation for half of his life. If he was not careful, he would be labeled as a traitor. Huang Fengfua sneered in his heart. You, Hong Yu, can betray Shenyuan Jinggong's second branch today. Will you betray your new master's first branch in the future? Hong Yu suddenly said. Hong Yu has something to tell Mississippi. Shenyuan Qingfeng nodded. Hong Tuo's tone was calm as he said. Back then, before Hong Tuo went up the mountain, he was actually secretly invited by brother Yu Jingqing. That was why he made the decision to come to Mount Hui. Otherwise, with Hong Yu's experience and ability, he definitely wouldn't have the courage to come to the bull gang and become a laughingstock. Huang Fengfua narrowed his eyes. Shenyuan Qingfeng felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders, and the knot in his heart was untied. He turned his head and smiled. Uncle Hong, you've suffered all these years. Hong Yu lowered his head and cupped his hands. That's how it should be. Hong Yu raised his head and looked directly at the young woman who was about to take control of Mount Hui. He said, but Hong Yu has received many favors from Emperor Shenyuan. Please treat the children of the second branch well. Shenyuan Qingfeng said softly, Uncle Hong, don't worry. Qingfeng isn't a narrow-minded woman. It's a fact that the second branch is powerful. Blindly purging dissidents will only cause the turbulent Mount Hui to fall apart. Qingfeng will do my best to appease the second and third branches. I won't change any of the established rules. Guests can stay if they wish, but leave if they don't. Even if they leave the bull gang today, Mount Hui will still welcome heroes from all walks of life to come up the mountain again. The grudges of my father's generation with the surname Jing, as well as those above him, will completely end today. If the other two branches cause trouble, Qingfeng can promise you twice, but not thrice. At that time, if they still refuse to let it go, then don't blame Qingfeng for being ruthless. Shenyuan Qingfeng spoke lightly, but Huang Fengfua felt much more at ease. He was afraid that this woman would become arrogant and start a massacre in Mount Hui. When that time came, who would be the executioners? Wouldn't it be him and Hong Yu? Moreover, in this way, he would have no room to maneuver and would be completely tied to her. This was originally a common method of controlling people. Logically speaking, it made sense. However, Huang Fengfua looked down on Shenyuan Qingfeng. Being in charge of a century-old aristocratic family was a strenuous job that could shake mountains and topple peaks. She only knew how to play petty tricks and was no different from a shrew with a loose tongue. She wasn't worthy of Huang Fengfua's loyalty. The most troublesome part was that Shenyuan Qingfeng's martial strength wasn't worth mentioning. Once the heir of Bailiang left, the more they suppressed her, the more likely it would be for him and Hong Yu when she rebounded in the future. Perhaps they wouldn't be able to suppress her even if they used all their skills. Walking to the entrance of the Bull Gang mansion, Su Fengnian stood under the eaves to shelter from the rain and looked back at the snowy plains. Shen Yuan Qingfeng stood nearby. She tilted her head and smoothed out a few strands of hair that stuck to her cheek. She remained silent. The wind and rain gradually stopped. A young man with delicate features walked out of the mansion. Seeing everyone, he respectfully said to Shen Yuan Qingfeng, "Yesterday, First Master gave me 4 brocade pouches. He said that after the rain stopped today, they would be given to Miss, His Royal Highness, and 2 esteemed guests." Shen Yuan Qingfeng was slightly surprised. Huang Fengfua and Hong Yu's expressions were especially solemn. Although they were serious, they weren't surprised. Clearly, this wasn't the first time they had received the brocade pouches. In fact, killing Shen Yuan Jingqing on the snowy plains was a request for the brocade pouches. Huang and Hong didn't know beforehand that the other party had truly surrendered to Shen Yuan Jingqing. Shen Yuan Qingfeng and the other 2 received the brocade pouches from the young man. Huang Fengfua and Hong Yu immediately excused themselves and left the snowy plains. The 2 esteemed guests didn't exchange even half a word of pleasantries. Huang Fengfua returned to the small building. He returned a clean set of robes and personally burned incense. He took out the small scroll hidden in the brocade pouch. After repeatedly reading it, he gently tossed it into the red sandalwood incense burner. He smiled and murmured, "Brother Jingqing really didn't disappoint me." There were only a dozen or so words written on the exquisitely cut paper. It was just like what Shen Yuan Jingqing usually said when he talked about writing. Zhongyi had said that simplicity was the end of poetry. "Brother Huang, please stay in Mount Hui for 10 years and you can enter the Finger Xian realm." Huang Fengfua first smiled and then laughed out loud. "Shen Yuan Jingqing, oh Shen Yuan Jingqing, are you asking me to work for your daughter for 10 years? Since you said you could help me enter the Finger Xian realm, don't mention 10 years, I can even wait 20 years. After laughing, Huang Fengfua decided to study at Bull Hill for another 10 years. He believed that with Shen Yuan Jingqing's meticulous planning, even if he couldn't enter the Finger Xian realm after reading all the secret manuals, Huang Fengfua was sure that another brocade pouch would appear at that time to solve his doubts. Huang Fengfua didn't even bother to think about who had the brocade pouch that he might not need in 10 years. With Shen Yuan Jingqing's meticulous mind, he was afraid that Huang Fengfua wouldn't be able to find it even if he turned the entire Bull Hill upside down. When the time was not right, the mysteries of heaven would not be revealed. Huang Fengfua sighed. "Brother Jingqing, what a Confucian sage." Huang Fengfua is fascinated. Hong Piao had never stayed in the luxurious abode of the guest of Mount Hui. It was easy to go from frugality to extravagance, but difficult to go from extravagance to frugality. Therefore, he chose to live in a secluded bamboo house on the mountainside. After opening the brocade pouch, his forehead was oozing with cold sweat. The general meaning of the brocade pouch was far less soul-stirring than the one given to Huang Fengfua. It was just that Shen Yuan Jingqing kindly reminded Hong Piao. If Qing Feng had any grudges against Hong Piao for killing Shen Yuan Jingqing, he could say that Hong Piao was invited by Shen Yuan Jingqing to come up the mountain. Hong Piao, who was kneeling in front of the bamboo tea table, clenched his fists so tightly that the veins on the back of his hands popped out. When he, Hong Piao, went up to Mount Hui, it naturally had nothing to do with Shen Yuan Jingqing. At that time, what he said on the snowy plains was just an idea he came up with on the spur of the moment. He played an unknown trick to eliminate Shen Yuan Qingfeng's vigilance. Therefore, although this brocade pouch seemed to be a kind reminder, wasn't it also a kind of warning? Hong Piao took a deep breath and raised his head to look out the window. He smiled. "Brother Jingqing is indeed an immortal." Hong Piao is completely convinced. The bull landed under the eaves. Su Fengnian looked at the rainbow stretching across the sky. One end of the rainbow was on the snowy plains, and the other end was on the Taoist master's residence. The scenery was absolutely beautiful. Su Fengnian opened the brocade pouch and was stunned. The words written on it were concise and to the point. "His Royal Highness only needs to ask my daughter for a copy of the Aspiring Tripod Pavilion Spring and Autumn Annals from my life. There is a letter in the envelope." At the end, there was even a sentence that went straight to the point. His Royal Highness did not let her down, and Mount Hui would not let His Royal Highness down. Shen Yuan Qingfeng leaned against a pillar, his eyes hazy with tears. Hong Piao is rebellious and needs Qingfeng to convince him with force. It's better to use force than to show kindness. When Mount Hui is peaceful, he can be raised. When there is chaos, he must be killed. Huang Feng has a good reputation. I have my own plans. Within 10 years, this person will not have any disloyalty. After 10 years, if he wants to make a name for himself, there will naturally be someone to suppress him. I left a book for the Taoist children of Mount Longhu to give to your grandfather. Qing Feng, you don't have to worry about this matter. If Su Fengnian has endless evil intentions and wants a yard after taking an inch, you can go and find the Taoist who fishes for flood salamanders in Mount Yunjin. This immortal elder owes me a favor and has promised me to come out once. If Su Fengnian does not overdo it, this person can work together to seek benefits. During the Qingming festival, if your mother is unwilling to visit the grave, Qing Feng need not force her. Since we can't help each other in times of need, it is already a blessing in life to forget each other. Since the day you were born, I have buried a jar of wine under an old cassia tree. From then on, I have 1 jar every year. Now, I have 23 jars. How about privately naming your daughter Hong? Don't blame me for nagging. It's just that I haven't been able to talk to you all these years. In the future, my grandson will be called Fu Yao, and my granddaughter will be called Yasong. How about it? All these years, I have been flipping through ancient books when I have nothing to do. I have 100 headaches, but I still can't think of a satisfactory name. I hope that in the future if they want to study, then they can study. If they want to practice martial arts, then they can practice martial arts. The world is vast, but they can only stand on a small piece of land. Life is bitter and short. It's only 100 years, 36,500 days. Once you read it, destroy it. Remember, remember. Su Fengnian watched as Shenyuan Qingfeng swallowed the paper in the brocade pouch. What a heartless woman. In the quiet courtyard of the eldest son's house, that woman also received a brocade pouch. However, the paper was completely blank. Chapter 316. After the Heavenly Master Manor's external surname Qi Xuanzhen ascended, Mount Longhu rarely had a grand occasion where the 4 great Heavenly Masters gathered together. Even when the butcher Su Shao led several thousand iron cavalry to the foot of the mountain, the number 1 of the Longhu Hope generation, Zhao Shi, still didn't break out of seclusion. Of the 36,000 great heavenly cycle rituals of Xiangfan, only 2 of the 4 great heavenly masters went. In the past 20 years, Zhao Danping became the prime minister of Xianxia in the capital. Together with Yue minister Zhao Donxia, the north and south reflected each other's splendor, meeting even less than they were apart. The Imperial College's left Chancellor Huan Wen and the current court's Grand Secretary Zhang Julu came from the same sect. Their Tao and politics aligned, the 2 were as close as brothers. However, on one matter, their opinions differed. Everyone knew that Grand Secretary Zhang only respected Confucianism, belittled Buddhism and Taoism, while Huan Wen, who came from an orthodox Confucian background, greatly respected Elder Huang's tranquility. In the capital, he had a deep friendship with Zhao Danping. Even though Zhao Danping was 1,000 li away from the Heavenly Master Manor, he still commanded Mount Longhu's rules and precepts, as well as the 2 great sections. Outside, Zhao Donxia commanded the world's Tao sects, but internally, he only symbolically disciplined the teachings. As for the cultivation arts in name, it was commanded by the old Heavenly Master Zhao Shi, but in reality, it was handed over to several people of the Jing generation to handle the specific matters. Zhao family's clan relative Zhao Jingchen was in charge of receiving guests at the manor gate. Bai Yu, who was bestowed with the purple title by the Son of Heaven, was in charge of theory and debate, frequently opening forums to preach. Qi Xianxia, who was also an external Taoist like Sir White Lotus, was in charge of sword training, occasionally passing on sword techniques to Taoists of the Jing generation and below. The various branches of the Celestial Master residence were connected by the same breath and branch. They each enjoyed their own glory and complemented each other. That was why Mount Longhu was enjoying such a glorious time today. On the west side of the Jade Emperor Hall in the main hall of the Taoist Master residence, there was a long corridor of ancient tablets. One of them was a large green jade tablet that was 30 feet tall. It was moved here and erected by the 4th generation of the Dragon Tiger Mountain Grandmaster. The tablet was inscribed with the words, "Purple Cloud Blessed Land." It was rumored that the tablet was the same as the tablet of "Enjoying the Blessings of the Land Alone" in Mount Hui. At this moment, a Taoist wearing a noble yellow Taoist robe was standing on top of the tablet. He was looking at the snowfield of Mount Hui with a face full of anger. At the foot of the tablet, there were 3 old Taoists who were dressed in their own unique style. The oldest had snow-white hair, sandals, and clean socks. He was only wearing an ordinary white Taoist robe. It was not very eye-catching, but at least he was wearing an ethereal alchemist's cloak, which vaguely gave him the aura of immortality. The second oldest Taoist was much more sloppy. He wore a thick green cotton robe that was stained with stains, as if he was afraid of the cold. He wore a pair of thick-soled warm shoes and a cotton cloth wrapped around his legs. It made people wonder how this old Taoist was qualified to stand in the inner residence of the Taoist master residence. The last one was frightening. Not only was his inner robe yellow, but he also wore a purple robe. It was extremely luxurious and noble. The direct descendants of the Taoist master residence could wear yellow, which was the case for Zhao Jingchen and Zhao Ningyun. There were very few honorable Taoist masters in Mount Longhu who could wear purple, and Bai Yu belonged to this category. As for the Taoist master who could wear yellow and purple, there was no doubt that there was only one Taoist master, Zhao Danxia. The 4 Taoist masters with the same surname as the emperor, Zhao Shi, who had spent most of his life in seclusion trying to break through. Zhao Shituan, who was talented but indifferent. Zhao Danxia, who was the leader of Taoism, and Zhao Danping, who was good at writing poetry, finally met. The strange phenomenon on the snowy plains of Mount Zhaoyao fell into the eyes of the Taoist masters. It was Zhao Danping who stopped Li Chuangong's sword of prophecy from flying out of its sheath. It was also Zhao Danping who asked the old god of swords to return the sword. After hearing the reply, Zhao Danping was furious, while Zhao Shituan laughed uncontrollably. Zhao Danxia and his father, Zhao Shi, looked at each other and smiled. When Zhao Shituan was young, he was not close to his nephew, Zhao Danping. He always felt that this child was not likable since young. He was gloomy and did not have the magnanimity of a descendant of the surname Zhao. Therefore, the old Taoist master did not hide his preference for Zhao Danxia. Zhao Shituan and Zhao Danping could be said to be the nemesis of fate. Although they were closely related by blood, they did not have a good expression when they met. This time, Zhao Danping left the capital to return home mostly to discuss with his brother how to deal with the latest political affairs of the imperial court. The empire's territory was restructured, and the original 24 districts of Taoism would have to follow suit and make changes. Moreover, after the position of monk Zhang was established, Chongxian Bureau was very likely to leave Honglu Temple. The battle between Buddhism and Taoism, the battle of doctrines, and the battle of fate was on the surface. They could not be careless at all. A small part of the reason was that the crown prince of Bailiang had arrived at Dragon Tiger Mountain. In addition, the king of Bailiang, Su Xiao, had caused a huge commotion in the capital. Zhao Danping did not have a good impression of Su at all. It was possible that he did not have the intention to return to the Taoist master's residence to punish the young crown prince. Zhao Shituan said impatiently, "Zhao Danping, why are you still standing on the stone tablet of your ancestor? Li Chungang did not want to talk to you. It's useless even if you shout until your throat is hoarse. Why don't you use your flying sword and fight with Li Chungang on the snowfield? I'll do my best to cheer for you." Zhao Danping snorted coldly and floated down from the stone tablet. Leaping over the top of the tablet was not appropriate. At that time, he was angry at Li Chuangong's rude and unreasonable methods, so he did not care about his identity. Now that he had calmed down, Zhao Danping did not insist. Zhao Shi, who had been disturbed by Shenyuan Jingqing's forced breakthrough, put his hands in his sleeves and lamented, "This person risked his life to enter the demigod realm. It's really a pity. If he was willing to take it step by step, there's a chance that he could really ascend." Zhao Danxia, who had the most celestial aura, nodded and said, "After this battle, Hui Mountain's luck has been completely destroyed." Zhao Shi's face was full of sorrow. There's no door to misfortune, only man can summon it. The warning of the ancients must not be ignored. Dragon Tiger Mountain should take this as a warning. Danping. Chapter 317. Although Zhao Danping's temperament was extreme, but her martial arts skill, intelligence and talent were all first class in the present age. After hearing her father's rebuke, her original intention to argue with her uncle Zhao Shituan immediately dissipated. She calmed her heart and concentrated her spirit. Immediately the sharpness in her heart disappeared. She no longer showed any sign of wanting to compete with Li Chungang. The Taoist master mansion had been passed down for 1,600 years. Most of the time, it was passed down from father to son. If the Taoist master had no children, he would be succeeded by his brothers and nephews. There was no precedent of a woman taking over. The previous sect leader, Zhao Shixi, had no children. Back then, it was either his younger brother Zhao Shituan, his nephew Zhao Danxia, or Zhao Danping who took over the Qingji capital skill seal, the luck-suppressing sword, and the Titan Emperor scripture. Back then, the sect leader's opinion was not unanimous. Back on the mountain, there was an old ancestor of virtue and prestige who wanted Zhao Shituan to take over the responsibility. Zhao Shituan simply ran away from the mountain and went to Zhonghu to live a carefree life. He said that it was better to pass on the legacy to Danxia than to him. That was how Zhao Danxia became the sect leader. The Taoist Master Mansion's Taoist Master Mansion was far from being the Taoist Master Mansion's Taoist Master Mansion. The latter had been recognized as the ancestral court of Southern Taoism for 500 years. After the death of Wang Zhongluo, Mount Wudong was just a Taoist Master Mansion. In the eyes of many Taoists on Mount Longhu, it was just a Taoist Master Mansion. How could it be compared to the Taoist Master Mansion? Fortunately, the Taoist Master Mansion improved under Zhao Danxia's leadership and became the leader of all Taoism in the world. Zhao Danping, who originally wanted to establish his own sect under the feet of the emperor, finally bowed his head. That was why his father, Zhao Shi, said that there was no blessing or disaster. Zhao Danping said coldly, "That Li Chungang returning to the realm of sword immortal is a great feat, but he borrowed 1,000 swords from Mount Longhu on the snowfield. If this spreads out, where will the Taoist Master Mansion's face go?" Zhao Danxia smiled softly and said, "Face is lost on Danxia. Let Danping pick it up in Beijing. Capable people do more work. Big brother, please excuse me." "Big brother, you're such a scoundrel. What are you doing?" Zhao Danping said helplessly. Her tone was no longer inflexible and stiff. After leaving Mount Longhu for so many years, how could it be that simple to write a poem by the emperor's side? After encountering many coincidences and comprehending the heavenly Tao, he was able to break through 100 armors with his horsetail whisk and compete with the black-robed monk Yang Taiji. Zhao Danping's personality gradually became more flexible. She was no longer as fierce as she was in the prime of her life, wanting to take others down with her at every turn. If it was more than 10 years ago, Zhao Danping would have already gone to Mount Hui to find trouble with Li Chungang. Mysteriously, the harmonious atmosphere in the Taoist Master Mansion today was largely due to Zhao Jingxi, who had a son in her later years. This child was ranked at the end of the Jing generation. Her talent in martial arts was mediocre, but she had the advantage of being as honest as jade. She was a junior who loved to express her feelings and was not scheming at all. Even the eccentric Zhao Shituan, who did not see eye to eye with Zhao Jingxi, would have to smile knowingly when he met Zhao Jingxi. Everyone in the Taoist Master Mansion liked to joke about some of Zhao Jingxi's embarrassing moments. What was even rarer was the few most outstanding people in the Taoist Master Mansion who did not share the same surname. For example, Bai Yu and Qi Xianxia had gotten along well with Zhao Jingxi since they were young. The female Taoist nun who cultivated on the mountain was also happy to tease this Taoist Master Mansion's Wang Huang. Even the female Taoist nun who was just a young girl dared to make fun of him. The old Taoist master Zhao Shituan said that Zhao Danping's greatest merit and ability in this life was giving birth to such a son. Zhao Jingxi's biggest characteristic was that he was absent-minded. He would often be chatting with others one moment and then be in a daze the next. The people on the mountain were most afraid of him reading and looking for answers because no matter how thin the book was, he could read thousands of strange questions. Even the chief, Zhao Danxia, who was a patient elder, could be questioned to the point of being angry. Mr. White Lotus, who had hurt his eyes from reading, was not inferior to Zhao Danxia. He mocked himself for having 3 fears in life: afraid of thunder, afraid of walking, and afraid of Zhao Jingxi's questions. It was obvious how powerful Zhao Jingxi's questions were. Zhao Shituan clicked his tongue and said, "Old Man Li has returned to the peak of the sword Dao. It is highly likely that he will have a battle with Wang Xianji." Zhao Shi stroked his beard and smiled. "It seems that the battle with Dong Tai will happen in the future." Zhao Danxia and Zhao Danping looked at each other and smiled. The 2 elders in the family were of the same generation as Li Chungang and Wang Xianji. Naturally, they had ulterior motives regarding Li Chunggang's entering into the celestial realm. With their high realm and status, it was difficult for them to find something to take a break from their busy lives except for concentrating on cultivating and attaining immortality and paying attention to the fate of Taoism. The Taoist master was unattainable to the common people. However, in the Taoist master residence, the Taoist master Zhao's clan, it was not much. After all, they were a family. It was the common view of a descendant looking at an elder. Zhao Shi waved his hand and said, Dan Ping, go ahead and tell Xianxia about the important matters. It was not easy for me to climb out of the coffin and take a breather. I want to chat with your uncle. Zhao Danxia and Zhao Danping received the order and left the steel corridor. Zhao Shi looked at his brother and said sadly, every time we meet, we get old. Shituan, I don't know how many times I can see you in this life. Zhao Shituan said angrily, you're so pretentious. If you don't go into seclusion, I'll see you every day and throw up when I see you. Zhao Shi shook his head and said, Wang Zhonglo has cultivated the big yellow court, but I still can't ascend the Jade Emperor Tower that the old ancestor pointed out. I'm ashamed to face the ancestors. Zhao Shituan said angrily, you don't have the face to face the ancestors because you can't ascend the Jade Emperor Tower and become a celestial? Then won't I anger the ancestors to the point that they have to ascend to the mortal world? Zhao Shi smiled and said, let's not talk about this. How's your disciple's realm? Zhao Shituan smiled and gave a thumbs up like a naughty child. This. When do you go down the mountain? After defeating Qi Xuanzhen's black tiger, you can go down the mountain. Good. Zhao Shi nodded and said, but then he was a little worried. In the last decennial debate on Lotus Peak, because the white-robed monk was busy, he didn't attend. Our Dao sect also had a hard time winning. If it wasn't for Bai Yu turning the tide, we might not have won. I heard that the 2 Zen temples this time was very strange. Not only did Li Dongxin and a few other virtuous eminent monks not take part in the debate, they even let a little monk represent the 2 Zen temples. That's right, Bai Yu mentioned that this little monk came to the Celestial Master residence with a young lady. Bai Yu said that the little monk is very intelligent. In the future, his achievements will be high and he might be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with Li Dongxin. Zhao Shituan said with a headache, I can't be bothered to worry about this. It's just a battle of words. It's boring to sit on Lotus Peak for a few days and nights under the sun. If it's not suffering, what is it? In the end, it's just a quarrel. There's nothing to be proud of even if we win. Zhao Shi said worriedly, it's not a big deal at first. If we win, we win. We'll just take it as winning some face for our Dao sect. But now the imperial court's arrangement is very mysterious. It's like casting a wide net. If we win, it's fine. If we lose, the fate of the 3 sects will increase or decrease. Zhao Shituan said heartlessly, if the elder ancestor didn't say something about making a small bet with someone, there wouldn't be this trouble. Brother, do you know who the elder ancestor is betting with? What's the bet? What's the bet? Zhao Shi hesitated and said softly, I only know that it's a bet between people with the same surname. They're betting on who will ascend later. The bet is a seal for a seal. The laziest Zhao Shituan felt a headache. Only the elder ancestor likes to mess around. If he was willing to ascend to immortality with Qi Xuanzhen back then, Qi Xuanzhen would have turned into a rainbow in broad daylight and I, Zhao Shituan, would have ascended on a crane. Zhao Shi smiled and said nothing. Zhao Shituan laughed. Actually, I know what the elder ancestor is thinking. Our dragon Tiger Mountain is known to have a great immortal attaining Dao every 100 years. It's our fault for being so disappointing. If the elder ancestor had ascended earlier and no one attained immortality in the next 50 years, we would have lost a lot of face. I guess that's why he decided to bet with that person on who will ascend later. Zhao Shi stared and said, watch your words. Chapter 3:18. For some reason, Su Fengnian didn't walk into the treasure-filled bull descent. He just sat on the steps under the eaves, with his brother Su Longxiang and maid Blue Bird standing behind him. His Royal Highness muttered to himself, and Shenyuan Qingfeng couldn't hear him clearly. Of course, she couldn't guess that this Bailiang heir was moaning and groaning. After leaving Liangzhou, first the red armor talisman reappeared in Jianghu, then the sword crown and sword attendant of the Wu family's sword tomb inexplicably blocked the way. Not to mention the 11th in the world, Wang Mingyin, who wanted to take away the head. Then, Chao Chongqing took away Jiang Ni in Gangnam-do and continued eastward. At Kuanglu Mountain, he even met Zhao Huangchao, who was in the celestial being's astral body state. When he finally reached the Daodu's Longhu Mountain, there were Confucian saints and sword immortals in the great snow plains. Su Fengnian believed that he was diligent in practicing his saber, but any one of these guys didn't even have the qualifications to fight to the death. That kid Wenhua said that there was no reason to always be attacked in Jianghu, but when he met these guys, He had no choice but to be attacked. At this moment, Su Fengnian finally understood why the bull rider was as timid as a mouse. It was right not to go down the mountain. With Hong Shixiang's identity, going down the mountain so easily was like carrying a large signboard with the words, "Come and hit me," written on it. This Jianghu's experts had their own experts to deal with. A Vajra realm martial artist seemed to be able to do whatever he wanted. But what if a Finger Xian realm martial artist found him an eyesore? A Finger Xian realm expert was awe-inspiring, but a heavenly image realm thousand-year tortoise would come out of the pond to teach him a lesson. Was a heavenly image realm invincible enough? Didn't Shenyuan Dandan study for his grandson Shenyuan Jingqing and become an earth immortal? After 100 years of hard work, he didn't even leave behind a handful of ashes, let alone a complete corpse. Su Fengnian lay on the ground, sighing again and again. Jianghu was dangerous. Shenyuan Qingfeng waited for a long time, but Royal Highness didn't return. Finally, he said impatiently, "Your Highness won't enter Bull Descent? The things here are too dirty. Qingfeng will definitely not take anything away. Your Highness can take whatever you want." Su Fengnian still did not respond. After a long while, an unfamiliar young girl walked out of the mansion. She had the same demeanor as the young man who had previously delivered the brocade pouch. She said softly, "First Master instructed this servant to deliver a brocade pouch if your Highness does not submit to the bull." Su Fengnian finally regained his senses. He rolled his eyes and said, "Are you done yet?" While muttering to himself, he hastily took the brocade pouch and opened it to take a look. He waited until the young girl had walked back to Yunia town before whispering to Shenyuan Qingfeng, "Your father said that there's a treasure house in Yunia town. The door was made by the Mahis School of Shangyin Academy and is indestructible. The male and female Jiao salamanders are the inner and outer rings. If you want to enter, you have to drip a drop of blood into the male Jiao salamander's mouth. The male Jiao salamander will then drill through the door and swim through the mechanism to meet the female Jiao salamander. If your Shenyuan bloodline is broken, won't no one be able to open it?" Shenyuan Qingfeng frowned. "What do you want, Your Highness?" "To tell you the truth, the male Jiao salamander died last year. I went to Yunjin Mountain to look for a new one, but I couldn't find one. Since the young prince is studying at Mount Longhu, I believe Your Highness must have a good relationship with the Taoist Master's mansion. I heard that the Taoist Master's mansion raises several Jiao salamanders in the Dragon Pond. Your Highness might as well ask for one of them to be given to Mount Huishan. The treasure house can be considered a reward from the Shenyuan family for Your Highness's hard work in coming to the mountain." Shenyuan Qingfeng's face was filled with mockery as he spoke. It was obvious that he wanted to make a fool of himself. He had clearly taken advantage of His Royal Highness' weakness when he used the old god of swords to say, "Fart," to the Taoist Master's mansion. Su Fengnian, who was lying on the ground, cast a sidelong glance at Shenyuan Qingfeng. He said lazily, "What? You think I don't dare to ask for a Jiao salamander? If the Taoist Master's mansion isn't willing to give it to me, then I'll snatch it. If I can't snatch it, then I'll steal it. If I can't steal it, then I'll talk nicely and beg for it." Shenyuan Qingfeng's lips curled into a subtle arc as he said with a smile that wasn't a smile, "Your Highness doesn't bother with trifles when doing things. In the future, you will inherit the title of Northern Liang King. As long as you use this method to deal with the Northern Mang dynasty, you will definitely be able to achieve victory and leave your name in history." Su Fengnian stood up, pretending not to hear the mockery in her voice. "I'll take your auspicious words." Su Fengnian then changed his expression and smiled warmly. "Not only does the brocade pouch say that there are several items in the treasure house that can catch my eye, it also says that there's an item outside the armory that's even more precious than an entire mountain. It asks me to treasure it well. The words on the brocade pouch are, 'Far in the horizon, yet close in front of you.'" Shenyuan Qingfeng's expression changed slightly. Su Fengnian laughed heartily and jumped down the steps. "Silly girl. Your father is willing to give you to me? Besides, even if he's willing to give you to me, I'm not willing to accept you. You don't have any breasts or buttocks, and you're always wearing a bitter face. You can see female ghosts when you look in the mirror." Shenyuan Qingfeng stared at Su Fengnian's back with a complicated expression. As they approached the edge of the snowfield, Bluebird whispered, "Young master." Su Fengnian had a telepathic connection with her and knew what she was thinking. He smiled and explained, "It's not that I'm deliberately making things difficult for Shenyuan Qingfeng, but this woman won't listen to your kind words. If you really want to confide in her, I'm sure she'll treat your kind intentions as ill intent. If you really think I covet her beauty or her family fortune, wouldn't I die of injustice? Ignoring the gloomy Shenyuan Qingfeng, His Royal Highness had just descended the snowfield when he saw a large group of people kneeling in front of him. There were no less than 30 people. Su Fengnian only needed to think for a moment to realize what was going on. He held down Xiao Chunlei and looked down at them with a smile. Oh, you all know how to sail according to the wind. You're in a hurry to serve me so you can go to Bailiang and ride roughshod over them? This matter is fine, but I'll say the ugly words first. If you really have some ability, I won't send you away like your beggars. I don't care if you used to be a wanted criminal or a thief. My rice bowl is very big. Not to mention a few dozen people, even a few hundred people will be full. However, if you don't have any ability and want to eat and drink for free, I don't care if you're a guest of Mount Hui or some martial arts hero from Witchpath, Scram. Once you're caught, I'll take your heads to the authorities to exchange for some money. Most of the Jianghu people who relied on Mount Hui were stunned. Wasn't this Bailiang heir a bit too ignorant and incompetent? How could his words be more straightforward than a thief? At that moment, a dozen or so fence-sitters stood up cautiously and tried to change their minds and leave. Half of these people were proud and arrogant and didn't want to be bullied. The other half were just here to make up the numbers. They wanted to go to the wealthy Bailiang heir and ask him to live a luxurious life. This group of people didn't have a high status in the Great Bull Gang. They belonged to the category of nobodies who weren't loved by their grandmothers and uncles. They wouldn't be able to obtain the most lucrative position of a guest of Mount Hui. Normally, not to mention an entire secret manual, even if it was just a single page, they would fight until their heads bled. Those who had relatively good relationships with each other were also deceiving each other. Those who weren't of noble status could only borrow secret manuals from the aspiring Cauldron Pavilion for a limited period of time. They couldn't take it out of the pavilion. If someone secretly copied it, they would be expelled from Mount Hui once they were discovered. Many martial arts heroes who had similar martial arts styles would each memorize the manuals by rote. The more the better. After the event, they would exchange secret manuals with each other. Those with slightly bad intentions would say a few more words at a critical juncture. This wouldn't cause the other party to go crazy, but it would cause the other party to take a detour. There were only a few dozen guests of Mount Hui. Su Fengnian actually became absent-minded at a time like this. This was because he didn't want to stay on Mount Longhu any longer after hastily settling the affairs of the Great Bull Gang. He was going to head to the northeast of the Jian province. Martial Emperor City. Chapter 319. Shenyuan Qingfeng walked back to the courtyard where the eldest son's quarters were. The glazed fish tank in front of the courtyard had been destroyed. Looking up at the plaque, he saw that his father, Shenyuan Jingqing, had written the Flask of Eternal Spring. Passing through the hall, there was the Imperial Library, where Shenyuan Jingqing had spent almost all of his time as a teenager. There were more than 6,000 scrolls here, but it was completely different from the aspiring Cauldron Pavilion. There were very few martial arts manuals here, but they were all classics of the 100 schools of thought. The small building was simple, but the windows were bright and clean. The top floor had a wide view, from where one could observe the South Star and the Big Dipper. At the back, there was a Lingji courtyard with a small facade. On both sides of the courtyard were small and narrow side rooms. Originally, it was meant to provide lodging for the maids and servants. It was just that the main wife's courtyard was deserted, and that woman's temperament was cold and she did not like noise, so she left behind a personal maidservant. The side rooms were all used to store sundries. Many of the poems and essays that Shenyuan Jingqing had written when he was young to express his grievances were thrown into piles by her, scattered all over the table, chairs and floor. There was a pair of male and female 1,000-year-old Luohan pines on the side of the corridor. Their roots were intertwined and their crowns were juxtaposed, making this place seem even more desolate and unsettling. Shenyuan Qingfeng walked further into the rear hall of the woman's private quarters. There were originally countless paintings and couplets, but they had all been removed by her. Only a large plaque hung in the middle of the hall that read, "Better to leave than to come." It was probably because she used too much effort to move them that she was able to survive. Shenyuan Qingfeng walked to the tea room with a view of the Dragon King River and saw that she was sitting quietly with a pile of ashes beside her. There was only a white jade scroll left of a painting. Shenyuan Qingfeng said coldly, "Father killed the old ancestor as a land god. Shenyuan Jingqing was ambushed by Huang Fengfua and Hong Yu. Grandfather was expelled from the mountain. Bailiang's heir, Su Fengnian, killed more than 10 people in one breath outside the snowfield. He had the light cavalry and retainers hang their corpses in front of the east sect of Mount Hui. He declared that he wouldn't accept anyone from Mount Hui. Now, 3 or 4 of the 10 guests of Mount Hui are gone. As for the rest of the Jianghu people, most of them have chosen to leave the mountain. Only in front of her daughter, Shenyuan Qingfeng, would the woman not be so cold and distant. She smiled gently and said, "Isn't this the perfect time for Qingfeng to take over Mount Hui?" Shenyuan Jingqing had swept clean the Great Snow Plateau, and with Bailiang's crown prince eyeing him covetously, it could be said that there were internal and external troubles. Those ministers of resurgence in the history books all stepped forward bravely at this time to turn the tide. Only then could they make people feel grateful and fearful at the same time, controlling the people's hearts. It was just the 4 words of combining kindness and power. If Mother didn't guess wrong, Shenyuan Jingqing had already reached a secret agreement with His Royal Highness. Aside from Huang Fengfua and Hong Yu, the 2 open chess pieces, there were still some hidden chess pieces that were biding their time, right? What Mother was most curious about right now was whether His Royal Highness had asked for an exorbitant price to make things difficult for Qingfeng. If she married into Bailiang Palace as a concubine, it was not impossible. With Mount Hui's Shenyuan family's several hundred years of foundation as a dowry, there weren't many women in the world who could afford such a large sum, right? The woman's voice was soft and gentle, very pleasing to the ear, but the meaning behind her words was chilling to the bone at this moment. Shenyuan Qingfeng couldn't stop laughing and actually laughed until tears came out. She wiped her tears and said, "I've disappointed Mother. That His Royal Highness doesn't care about Mount Hui, not to mention Shenyuan Qingfeng, who can't even get into the Rouge Review. Mother, you can only blame yourself for not giving birth to a more beautiful Qingfeng back then." The woman didn't get angry and only quietly waited for Shenyuan Qingfeng to finish laughing. Seeing her daughter's unstoppable tears, she reached out to help wipe them away, but Shenyuan Qingfeng fiercely slapped her hand away. She still didn't take it to heart and gently said, "Rats go into hiding because of grain, dogs go into hiding because of poverty. It's a pity that this only applies to the small families. Although Mount Hui's fate has been greatly damaged, it doesn't mean that they won't be able to recover from this setback. What Bullock Gang encountered today is still somewhat better than what happened 100 years ago when the Wu family's sword tomb's first-rate experts almost all died in Beimang. Bailiang's heir hung up the corpses to intimidate everyone and was clearly building momentum for Qingfeng. If it's as you said, that heir's ambitions aren't in Mount Hui, that's even better. After he leaves with his troops, if Qingfeng feels that he's short of money and can't control the situation, you can ask Mount Longhu for some protection. The Celestial Master residence and Bullock Gang have always been linked for several hundred years. A close neighbor is better than a distant relative. Shenyuan Qingfeng sneered and said, "In the end, you're still asking for help." The woman murmured softly, "In life, one must ask for help from heaven, earth, king, father, and mother. Who doesn't ask for help?" Shenyuan Qingfeng said expressionlessly, "That heir left more than 100 light cavalry at Mount Hui. He said they were responsible for transporting the copies of the aspiring tripod pavilion's secret manuals back to Bailiang." The woman smiled and said, "Shenyuan Jingqing once said something that I've remembered. A man's talent is 10,000 pounds, but it can't compare to a woman's chest." From what I can see, His Royal Highness clearly still has feelings for Qingfeng. It doesn't matter whether or not she's Bailiang's side consort. A noble family's wealth isn't necessarily a blessing for a woman. But if we can use this opportunity to stabilize Mount Hui, that's the most important thing right now. Mother said one more thing. No matter how talented that Yuan Tingshan is, don't meet him in the future. No matter how great a martial artist's achievements are, they can't compare to a single word from the heir of Bailiang. In the short term, you can only get close to the heir of Bailiang and not alienate him. As for the long term, just take one step at a time. It's like playing chess. Qingfeng can't be in a hurry to place a piece. Shenyuan Qingfeng was lost in thought. He poured himself a cup of wine, which was still warm and fragrant. He raised his head and took a big gulp. The woman, who was no longer young, had a gentle gaze. She smiled and said, "A cup of osmanthus wine in your mouth will bring 2 peach blossoms to your face." Shenyuan Qingfeng said calmly, "This was written by Father." She said calmly, Shenyuan Jingqing said so much and wrote so much. There's bound to be a few sentences that you remember. The ancient records say that Mount Zhaoyao has many ancient osmanthus, but there weren't many left when Mother came up the mountain. Among them, the Tangue is the oldest and the most luxuriant. Every autumn, the osmanthus seeds would fall like rain. It's glorious but not charming. She hesitated for a moment and said slowly, just like how Shenyuan Jingqing conducts himself. Shenyuan Qingfeng gripped his cup tightly and stared at her. He clenched his teeth and said, "Isn't it ironic to say that my father is good now?" She said calmly, "Mother, have you ever said anything bad about Shenyuan Jingqing?" Shenyuan Qingfeng bit the corner of his mouth so hard that blood seeped into the cup. He asked with a trembling voice, "Mother, have you ever liked father, even a little bit?" She shook her head and said, "I don't know." Shenyuan Qingfeng sneered like a madman. "Then you've never liked him. Poor father studied for you for 20 years, only to learn that you're the funniest immortal on earth in the last 1,000 years. She didn't refute. Shenyuan Qingfeng threw away his cup and suddenly stood up. With his back to her, he said in a deep voice, "Mother, don't worry. Father spent a lot of effort to create this situation. Qingfeng will definitely risk my life to make sure that Mount Huishan doesn't fall so that Mother can live a peaceful and stable old age." She still didn't say anything. She waited until Shenyuan Qingfeng left the courtyard before slowly standing up. She picked up the hot wine pot and walked straight to the snowfield without feeling the pain. The sky cleared after the rain, and the scenery on the snowfield was pleasant. She came to the cliff and revealed a beautiful smile that no one had ever seen before. "Jingqing, I won't be angry with you anymore." She leaped.